Is it possible to distort a sober mind so much that a person would take up arms and go on a killing spree? Today's story shows that it is indeed possible. It is hard to find a more merciless and senseless attack. Morgan Metzer and her husband, Rodney Metzer, were inseparable, as often joked by their friends, family. They met when she was 14 and he was 17. From the moment they met, it was love at first sight. What followed was a tender, loving relationship that continued to develop until they decided to tie the knot in 2009. Morgan was just 21 years old at the time. After their wedding, they went on a honeymoon, and upon returning, both continued to build their lives, strengthen their love. However, not everything went as smoothly as they had hoped. Less than a year into their marriage, Rodney suffered his first major loss. His younger brother Kevin, who had just turned 19, died of leukemia. According to Morgan, her husband changed after that, becoming harsher and more rude. She believed that this behavior would gradually pass and that her husband would return to normal. But even after years, he did not change and instead became increasingly cruel. Rodney began to cling to her for any reason, was very demanding, and did not tolerate criticism. Despite this, Morgan remembered the beginning of their life together fondly and did not want to leave her husband, hoping that everything would work out. On March 15, 2011, they had their first child, a boy named Kevin in honor of Rodney's deceased brother. Morgan and Rodney believed that this baby would allow them to restore their relationship and make Rodney more gentle. However, Kevin was born 2 weeks prematurely with a congenital heart defect. The child lived only 18 days before passing away, never having been discharged from the hospital. This tragedy hit the young father even harder and, of course, traumatized Morgan. She later described that moment as one in which she felt as if she had fallen out of reality, so much so that she could barely remember that period. Despite the tragedy, the Metzer coped. 3 months after losing their first child, they learned that Morgan was pregnant again, this time with twins. They welcomed this second chance to become parents and hoped that things would turn out differently this time. The children were born in 2012 and were healthy. However, contrary to expectations, the tension between the spouses only grew. Morgan often communicated with her loved ones and described her relationships with them during this period as psychological abuse. For the first time, she suspected that she had been living in a delusion all these years. She began to realize that her husband was a manipulative person who cruelly controlled her. Looking back, she recognized that Rodney had always been like this. It just took time and significant trauma for his true behavior to manifest fully. Many believed that Morgan had fallen into the trap of a manipulator because of her lack of life experience. She had been with him since she was 14 and had never been in another relationship. In fact, she did not know that it could be different. The situation only worsened when Rodney lost his job. Morgan was on maternity leave and caring for the twins, which meant she could not earn money. Their financial situation became difficult. Rodney soon had to take on 2 jobs to provide for their large family. He became very tired, which only made him angrier. Morgan decided to take action. When the children grew a little, she took matters into her own hands and opened a small interior design business. Contrary to her husband's expectations, Morgan was successful. She began to earn good money. Against the backdrop of her relatives' depressed state, she even became the primary breadwinner in the household. She hired her best friend to work with her. The first confirmation of Morgan's success came in 2020 when she received an award in her hometown for the best interior design. Rodney did not support her during this time. On the contrary, he felt like a failure compared to his more successful wife. He became more jealous and angry. He escalated from psychological violence to physical abuse. This happened for the first time during one of their joint weekends when they went boating together. They had an argument on the water, and when they returned home, Rodney hit his wife several times. This was a shocking moment for Morgan, as Rodney had always spoken out against physical violence and positioned himself as a fighter for women's rights. He had always presented himself as a kind and sensitive person, even refusing to watch films that depicted cruelty to women. His punch was the breaking point. Morgan now realized with horror who she had spent most of her life with. That night, she called her father and asked him to pick her up from their lake house. When her father arrived, Rodney denied hitting her. He then fully demonstrated his manipulative nature, somehow convincing all of Morgan's friends that she had given herself a couple of bruises to make him look bad. According to him, during an argument, she would hit herself, leaving marks on her own face. He claimed that any bruises on her resulted from his attempts to stop her crazy behavior for her own good. The manipulator went further. He had been communicating with his wife for a long time and even managed to convince her that she was partly to blame for what had happened. From that moment on, Rodney began to use this tactic constantly. He influenced her and set his wife up so that she gradually began to believe that the problems and quarrels in their family were her fault. He even blamed her for his career problems. At this point, the violence against Morgan only intensified. In addition to the psychological impact, she also suffered from abuse. But this could not continue forever. In 2020, Morgan decided it was time to put an end to it and filed for divorce. This decision immediately felt like a breath of fresh air. In December 2020, the marriage was officially dissolved. Morgan decided to move on, but she could not completely rid herself of her ex-husband since they had children together. When the decision to divorce was made, they did not go to court to divide custody. Instead, they agreed on everything verbally and remained on good terms in order to spare the younger generation from further hurt. The former spouses communicated closely and even took a joint trip to Florida to visit Morgan's sister before Christmas. Morgan and Rodney insisted that although the marital relationship was over, they continued to get along well for the sake of the children. Suddenly, on New Year's Eve, Morgan was attacked. Early in the morning of January 1, 2021, Rodney arrived at his ex-wife's house. He knocked on the door, but no one answered. So, he walked around the house, thinking she was still asleep, calling her name. Suddenly, he found her on the back porch. She was lying partially naked on the deck with her hands tied behind her back and a pillowcase over her head. She was obviously badly hurt. Rodney provided first aid and asked her what had happened. He then called 911. Upon arrival, law enforcement officers recorded that Morgan had been subjected to cruel treatment, abuse, and beating. She was very scared and had difficulty explaining what had happened. Morgan stated that a stranger in a black mask had broken into her home that night, attacked her, hit her in the face, strangled her several times until she lost consciousness, and abused her. He threatened to kill her and even mentioned her ex-husband and relatives who no longer lived with her. The police began to investigate what had happened. In the presence of her relatives, who were already there, they recorded Morgan's story. She had intended to spend this New Year's Eve with her best friend. She waited until the new year, drank a glass of champagne, and realized she was too tired from the shocks of the previous month, so she decided to go home and go to bed early. Her friends had argued a little about this, but Morgan insisted that she wanted to rest and regain her strength. At that time, her 8-year-old children were visiting her parents, giving Morgan the opportunity to enjoy her first good night's sleep in several weeks. Morgan returned home, turned on the security system, and went to bed. She woke up during the night, feeling that someone was in the room. Morgan noticed a dark figure in the doorway. At first, she thought she was imagining things. When she looked closely, she realized this was not a dream. The man was dressed in black and wore a mask that looked like Batman's. The tall figure appeared very menacing, standing with his fists clenched as if preparing to attack. A gun appeared in Hai's hand. He pounced on the defenseless woman, hit her with the weapon, and then punched her in the face several times. After that, he turned her over onto her stomach and tied her hands behind her back with makeshift restraints made from plastic zip ties. She begged him to let her go, but the man ignored her pleas, only throwing out a few phrases about how she would regret what she had done. Morgan had the feeling that the stranger was deliberately straining his voice, as if trying to imitate Batman's tone and image. The most horrific aspect for her was the beatings and strangulation. She lost consciousness several times, and each time she regained it, the violence resumed. Morgan was convinced she would not survive the night. The criminal tortured her, bringing her to the brink of death and then allowing her to breathe. This became the worst memory of Morgan's life. She even said she had an out-of-body experience because of the attack, as if she had left her body and was witnessing her own death. She abstracted herself from the events, thinking about her children and what would happen to them. She remembered that she had not even had time to write a will. Meanwhile, the beatings continued. The attacker abused Morgan while continuing to hit her in the face and head. When Morgan later recounted this to law enforcement officers, she expressed disbelief that anyone could want to do such a thing to her. However, she was sure that the voice changes and the dark clothing covering every part of the attacker's body were meant to prevent her from recognizing him, suggesting that he must have been familiar with her. Experienced detectives agreed with this assessment. It is worth noting that the criminal threatened not only Morgan but also her husband. Despite being officially divorced at this time, during another instance of strangulation, the attacker said she would miss her husband. At that moment, Morgan suspected that Rodney himself could be behind the attack. Once this thought crossed her mind, she attempted to play his usual psychological game. Instead of addressing her attacker directly, she began to manipulate his feelings, begging him not to hurt Rodney because she loved Rodney very much. As soon as she said this, the assault immediately stopped. The criminal ceased beating her, left her on the bed, and began walking around the room looking for valuables, likely to steal. When this change occurred, Morgan realized that she had managed to save her life. The criminal had completely altered his behavior and began to act not like a murderer but as a robber. He took the first thing he could find from her locker and then asked for her phone number and password. As it turned out, he was not interested in bank cards but in the security system. There were several video cameras installed in the house that recorded the attack. After rummaging through her mobile phone, he carried she out onto the back porch and left her there, telling her that she should not move until she heard 2 car horns, otherwise, he would return and shoot her. He put a pillowcase over her head so she couldn't see anything. Morgan lay in this state for more than half an hour. She didn't hear any beeps, but she decided it was better not to take any chances and continued to lie still. It seemed to her that the criminal might be hiding nearby and watching her. It is worth noting that Morgan lived in a remote area of the city, where there were few houses nearby, so she could not even call for help. When about 40 minutes had passed in this state, Morgan heard extraneous noises and footsteps. She thought that the criminal might have changed his mind and was now returning to kill her. When the steps got closer and stopped, she heard the familiar voice of her relatives. Rodney had found his ex-wife there, bound in plastic zip ties with a pillowcase over her head. It was about 2 a.m. The very appearance of her ex-husband in Morgan's house at that time seemed strange. The children were visiting their grandparents, and they had not arranged to meet. Despite the strangeness of the situation, Morgan kept herself in check. She pretended to be hysterical, did not chase her ex away, and did not accuse him of the attack. On the contrary, Morgan began to act more cunningly. She tried to persuade Rodney to stay with her, call for help, and not go anywhere. In fact, her goal was to keep the alleged criminal there until the police arrived. When the emergency services were called, several police officers went to Morgan's house. At this time, Rodney was sitting outside in his car. This seemed odd, since he was the one who found his wife tied up and beaten. It would have been logical for him to be next to her, waiting for help. Instead, he was acting cautiously and even somewhat hostile. The law enforcement officers immediately began to ask themselves the same questions that had appeared in Morgan's head. What was her ex-husband doing in the house at 2 a.m. on New Year's Eve, just 40 minutes after the attack? Rodney justified his behavior by claiming romantic feelings and mentioning a strange young man. He said he was celebrating New Year's alone and thinking about his ex-wife. When a stranger stopped in front of the window and wrote the name Morgan on the frozen glass, it seemed alarming, so he decided to call her. After several unsuccessful attempts, he decided to go to the house himself because he felt that something was wrong. Rodney lived 15 minutes away from his ex-wife, so he arrived at her house relatively quickly, and for good reason. She really needed help. Detectives soon began to assess the situation. Morgan was so beaten that one of her eyes was swollen and almost completely shut. It was obvious that she had been the victim of a brutal attack by someone who was emotionally upset or angry at her, rather than by a random stranger or a burglar. Morgan's father and brother soon arrived at the scene. It was decided to speak to everyone present separately. Once Morgan was pulled aside, out of earshot from the rest of the family and her ex-husband, she made a significant confession. She claimed that it was Rodney who had not attacked her and was now posing as her savior to divert suspicion away from himself. The victim described the sequence of events in detail, including the moment when she began to profess her love for her ex, after which the beating abruptly stopped. She insisted that she recognized her ex-husband's touch, for example, when he lifted her from the bed to carry her to the porch. Morgan admitted that all this time she had deliberately kept Rodney nearby by asking him to stay with her. Morgan was afraid that if she directly accused her ex, he could kill her to cover his tracks. From a psychological perspective, this seemed plausible, as the most dangerous period for a woman who has been in a manipulative relationship for a long time is often the breakup. Morgan stated that for a week after the divorce, Rodney continued obsessively trying to maintain contact, seeking her pity. He even claimed that he had cancer, showing her a doctor's report. Considering that his brother had died of leukemia and his father was battling cancer during that period, this strategy evoked sympathy. Naturally, this sympathy did not lead to anything good. He was simply trying to get closer again because of his feelings. Morgan allowed him to spend the night at her house. A couple of days later, Rodney began persistently pushing to restore their relationship through pity and manipulation. By December 31st, she had realized this and finally broke off contact with him, cutting off her support. Rodney returned to his apartment, but less than a day later, she was brutally attacked. Throughout that day, Rodney tried to persuade her to rekindle their relationship, even stating that he had found a new high-paying job for her sake. He slipped a check for $56,000 under her door on New Year's Eve. Curiously, the man who attacked Morgan stole that check. None of this seemed like a coincidence. When Morgan laid out the facts to the police, her greatest fear was that the detectives would believe her manipulative ex-husband instead of her. This had happened multiple times before, even with people close to her. It was a huge relief when one of the detectives remarked that her story sounded quite convincing and that Rodney should be scrutinized closely. The detectives decided to catch the criminal in a lie, and to do this, they needed to verify each of his statements. They started with the calls he claimed to have made to his wife before he arrived. Morgan denied receiving any calls when the bastards took her cell phone. When investigators checked Rodney's phone, not only were there no outgoing calls on it, but there were numerous undressed photos of his ex-wife, taken as if she were unaware. Judging by the dates, the photos had been taken systematically over the week while Rodney was staying at her house after announcing that he had cancer. It appeared he had been filming her secretly. Additionally, Rodney had numerous photos of her phone, which contained conversations with other men. All this looked like stalking and confirmed the words of Morgan. When Morgan was asked about the photos, she stated that she had no idea about them and had not given permission for them to be taken. This alone was reason enough to bring charges, as it was considered a serious invasion of privacy. Rodney was detained and told outright that he was the assailant. He acted as if this was absurd. After checking Morgan's mobile phone, the police discovered that the criminal had deleted all the footage from the CCTV cameras in her home. However, this also indirectly confirmed the guilt of Rodney, since a random robber could hardly know about the security system of a random victim or how to use it. If the criminal was aware of the cameras, he would likely have chosen a less protected target. It was curious that the intruder knew how to enter the house without triggering the alarm. There were special sensors on all the doors and windows of Morgan's home. They were checked, and no signs of a break-in were found. The entire system remained operational, with the exception of one single window leading to the basement. As it turned out, the intruder had entered through this window. The switch was moved so that it did not work. Presumably, Rodney moved it on purpose while living there after the divorce, as he was planning an attack. The day after the arrest, the police received a search warrant for the suspect's home. When checking for sources of information, they found even more circumstantial evidence. Rodney's browser history was full of disturbing queries, such as, how much do you have to strangle a person to make them lose consciousness but not die, and how to change your voice. He had read an entire book about various psychological techniques for influencing women, titled, 7 Ways to Be a Hero to Your Wife. The doctor's note that confirmed Rodney's cancer diagnosis turned out to be fake. He had created a fake email account specifically to send himself a report from a fictitious doctor. During interrogation, Rodney found excuses for every suspicious fact that the police uncovered. After the first interrogation, the detectives decided that they did not have enough evidence against the main suspect. Rodney was released, and the investigation continued. The big problem for him was the plastic zip ties found in the apartment. Rodney had modified and cut them in a special way to make improvised handcuffs that could be quickly put on and secured to the hands. A whole package of such items was found in his apartment, as well as several sets that had been modified in the same way as those taken from Morgan's hands. When asked about the zip ties, Rodney claimed he had never owned any, as if he had never bought them. Perhaps someone had planted them on him to frame him. Even though they were found in his apartment, the police needed to confirm that Rodney was their owner. They then began checking local hardware stores. That same day, detectives found a video recording of the main suspect buying the zip ties. After that, Rodney didn't even know what to say. The most terrifying finding was the note. A farewell letter was discovered in the relative's apartment, indicating that he had planned to kill Morgan and then himself, leaving the children orphaned. Morgan miraculously managed to save herself by using a psychological trick that stopped the criminal and made him change his mind. He probably thought that not all was lost and that he could get back together with his ex-wife. The hope of a reunion actually saved her life. Among the most valuable pieces of evidence was a video of the facade of the apartment building where Rodney lived. No one came to the windows, and no one wrote Morgan's name with their finger. The criminal himself returned scene after the attack, having been inside for about 4 minutes. Presumably, during this time, he changed his clothes and disposed of the evidence. When leaving the apartment, before driving back to his house, he carried a black bag with him, which he discarded. Unfortunately, it was not found, but investigators believed that Rodney had thus disposed of material evidence. Just 1 day later, Rodney was arrested again. This time, in addition to the charges of violating privacy, they added a whole list of charges that included trespassing, damaging someone else's property, possession of a firearm, robbery with a weapon, aggravated assault, kidnapping, and abuse. He was held without bail. During this period, Morgan's children continued to live with her parents. When she took her twins, there was a difficult conversation in which she tried to explain that their father would no longer be around. For months, Morgan woke up from nightmares, dreaming of an attack, a mask, and a threatening voice. Sometimes, she couldn't even muster the strength to send her children to school because she was afraid to be alone in the house. The prosecutor's office had enough evidence against Rodney to put him behind bars. To avoid subjecting Morgan to the hardships of a trial, a plea deal was offered, and they both agreed to it. 8 months after the attack, on August 4, 2021, Rodney Metzer pleaded guilty to 14 counts related to the assault on his ex-wife. He was sentenced to a total of 70 years in prison, but with the possibility of parole after 25 years, it is understood that the remainder of the sentence will be served on probation. In fact, he will never leave the authorities' sight again for the rest of his life. Interestingly, he forbids even his own mother from visiting him in prison. Rodney is expected to be released in 2046. Morgan underwent therapy and has actually recovered from the trauma she experienced. Morgan said she is dedicated to helping women in similar situations as she was. She is also focused on raising her children. Stacy DeGrandchamp, a 17-year-old high school student from Fort Wayne, dreamed of attending Ball State University to pursue a career in computer technology. As an only child raised by a single mother, Stacy was described as confident, beautiful, and popular. However, her popularity often led to jealousy from others. On August 15, 2002, Stacy attended a party with approximately 20 people. Tragically, the night took a devastating turn when a fight broke out outside the house, leaving Stacy severely injured. She was rushed to the hospital but passed away shortly after. It took 17 years to solve the case, as witnesses were initially unwilling to come forward. In the spring of 2002, Stacy met Brandon Muff, a recent graduate of Fort Wayne High School, at a party. Brandon, who was in his early 20s, had a rebellious bad boy persona that Stacy found irresistible. She quickly fell for him and started spending time with his circle of friends. This group included girls Amanda Richards, Whitney McGee, and Holly Boisvert, who often hosted gatherings at Holly's house. Her home, which included a pool, became a popular hangout spot as her father gave the teens free rein. While Stacy appeared to fit in with the group, her presence reignited old tensions between her and Holly. The conflict between Stacy and Holly traced back to middle school. At an 8th grade pool party at Holly's house, she had mocked and splashed Stacy in front of others, causing Stacy to leave the gathering embarrassed. Although the two seem to have made up over time, old grudges resurface when Stacy joins Holly's group of friends as Brandon's girlfriend. Holly had previously dated Brandon, and while their relationship had ended, she still had lingering feelings for him. Stacy's budding romance with Brandon upset Holly, leading to renewed friction. However, This time Stacy did not let herself be intimidated like before. By the summer of 2002, the tension between Stacy and Holly had escalated. Holly began spreading rumors about Stacy, turning others in the group against her. At the same time, Stacy's relationship with Brandon started to unravel. Realizing she was on the wrong path, Stacy made a pivotal decision just weeks before her senior year of high school. She broke up with Brandon, distanced herself from his crowd, and began focusing on her future. She cut ties with most of the group, apart from a new friend she had made that summer, Abby Oswald. Determined to turn her life around, Stacy began preparing for the college years ahead. Abby, a friend of Brandon, met Stacy through him. On August 15, 2002, they spent the day together. They decided to go to the mall, as Abby was shopping for a prom outfit. Later, Abby suggested they attend a party at Brandon's house, where he lived with his roommate, Justin. Stacy was hesitant at first, but Abby convinced her to go. Around 9:30 p.m., they arrived at the house. Shortly before 11 p.m., the Fort Wayne Police Department, along with firefighters and paramedics, responded to a 911 call from the Guthrie Street area. Earlier, in the early evening, the police were called due to complaints about loud music and a small party. However, they left without further intervention. This time, when emergency responders arrived, they found a young woman lying in the driveway, bleeding from her chest. She was rushed to a trauma center in Fort Wayne, but her injuries proved fatal. Abby later explained to detectives what had transpired. When she and Stacy arrived at the party, Brandon and a woman, Holly, were sitting together on the porch. Stacy confronted Holly, questioning her presence. The argument quickly escalated into a physical fight. They pulled each other's hair, punched, kicked, and rolled on the grass. At one point during the fight, Stacy gained the upper hand and kicked Holly in the head or face. Suddenly, Stacy appeared to lose strength and went limp. At that moment, Brandon intervened. He grabbed Stacy by her ankles and dragged her toward the trash cans. Once in the yard, she managed to stand up and stagger down the driveway, but only a few seconds later, she passed out. Brandon went to check on her, lifted her shirt, and noticed that her bra was soaked in blood. That was when they called 911. Both Holly and Brandon were taken to the police station for questioning. Forensic experts arrived at the scene and taped off the area. They began taking photos and videos of the crime scene. Since Stacy was bleeding from the chest, investigators suspected that a weapon had been used. However, no sharp objects or knives were found in the backyard or driveway. After obtaining a search warrant, detectives entered the house and seized several kitchen knives from the table. Meanwhile, at the hospital, doctors worked in the operating room to save Stacy's life. She had a stab wound to her upper chest and another to her abdomen. Despite their efforts, she succumbed to her injuries. With her death ruled a homicide, the Fort Wayne police began an official investigation. At the station, Holly provided her version of events. She claimed she had no part in Stacy's injuries, stating that they had only argued and fought. Holly denied having a knife and suggested that Stacy might have fallen onto glass in the trash can. Brandon was also interviewed, and his blood-stained shirt was collected as evidence. He claimed he had pulled Stacy by her ankles to break up the fight but didn't realize how hard he had been pulling. He also suggested that she might have been injured by broken glass from the trash can. However, Holly and Brandon's statements didn't align with the evidence. Photos of the crime scene showed no broken glass in or around the trash cans. Moreover, there was no blood near them. The coroner's report confirmed that Stacy's injuries were caused by a sharp knife blade, as they were clearly stab wounds. Nevertheless, no knife was found at the scene or on Holly and Brandon at the time. They were then released, but the investigation into Stacy's death remained ongoing. On August 19, 2002, Stacy was laid to rest, dressed in the outfit she had planned to wear for her prom photo. Her funeral was crowded, with many of her friends from parties attending: Abby, Whitney, and Amanda. Notably absent was Holly, but Brandon attended, drawing everyone's attention. His presence surprised many, as rumors were swirling at Wayne High School that he and his friends had manipulated Stacy into attending the party where Holly could confront her. This raised suspicions among investigators about whether the incident was a premeditated plot by Holly to harm Stacy. Following Stacy's death, Holly became a social outcast as most people believed she was responsible. However, another rumor implicated Whitney. A few days before Stacy's death, Whitney had left a message on Stacy's answering machine, advising her to be careful. When a detective questioned Whitney about the message, she insisted it wasn't a threat but rather a warning. Whitney claimed she knew Holly wanted to pick a fight with Stacy and hoped to prevent the two from encountering each other. While Whitney may have been trying to keep Stacy and Holly apart, Brandon seemed to do the opposite. Whitney revealed to detectives that Brandon had called Holly on August 15th and pressured her to attend the party, warning her that if she didn't come, he would never speak to her again. Investigators began considering whether he had orchestrated the situation to provoke a confrontation between Holly and Stacy. She had just broken up with Brandon, which had hurt his self-esteem. Detectives speculate that revenge, combined with Holly's jealousy, may have led to Stacy's death. Abby, Stacy's new friend, played a significant role in convincing her to attend the party. Abby encouraged Stacy to go because she was friends with Brandon. Investigators later questioned Abby's motives, wondering why she would push Stacy to attend the party at the Guthrie Street house when Holly might be there. They suspected that she could have been involved in a plan to put Stacy in harm's way. However, Abby denied any involvement and claimed that she had actually tried to stop the fight that occurred that night. The investigation eventually shifted its focus to Brandon, leading detectives to speak with his roommate, Justin. On August 26, Justin was interviewed by law enforcement and became a key witness. He stated that when he had tried to break up the fight between Stacy and Holly, Brandon had stopped him and told him to let them fight, as if Brandon had been enjoying the confrontation. He also revealed that Brandon later asked him to tell the police that Holly hadn't done anything and that Stacy had simply fallen. This statement made detectives extremely suspicious. They believed Brandon might know important details but was either too scared to share them or deliberately trying to hinder their investigation. Brandon was questioned again, but during his second interview, he refused to provide any new information. He claimed he wasn't a snitch and denied seeing Holly with a knife. Detectives were convinced that Holly was responsible for the crime, but no witnesses were willing to admit they had seen anything, and no murder weapon was ever found. Without these crucial pieces of evidence, the authorities were unable to charge or arrest anyone. As time passed, weeks, months, and eventually years, the case went cold. 17 years after Stacy's death, no one had been held accountable, and no progress had been made in solving the case. It remained unsolved, leaving everyone involved frustrated and confused. Stacy's cousin, Jamie McMillan, refused to let the case fade into obscurity. Determined to find justice, Jamie reached out to Detective Brian Martin, who specialized in unsolved cases. In March 2019, Jamie urged Detective Martin to revisit the case. She suggested interviewing Brandon, Holly, Abby, and Amanda again, hoping that, with the passage of time, the witnesses might be more willing to talk and share the truth. Everyone who had attended the party that night was now older, and perhaps they had reflected on their lives and would finally provide new information that could advance the investigation. Detective Martin begins questioning Abby, who continues to deny ever seeing the knife, just as she did 17 years ago. Next, he interviewed Brandon, who appeared deeply remorseful and admitted the incident had weighed on him for years. However, Brandon also stated that he couldn't recall seeing Holly with a knife. About a month later, Detective Martin located Holly in Wisconsin. Holly was initially hesitant to open the door, but when she eventually did, Detective Martin introduced himself and explained that he was investigating an unsolved case. Holly turned visibly pale. When the detective asked whether she remembered the party, their conversation quickly revealed some surprising details. During their discussion, Holly repeatedly referred to Stacy as her friend. Holly admitted they had been difficult teenage girls, but Stacy was still her friend. She firmly stated that she would never intentionally harm Stacy or threaten Stacy with a knife. She then admitted that she had owned a folding knife at the time and usually carried it for protection. When the detective asked if she had the knife with her during the fight with Stacy, Holly left the room and returned with the very same knife in hand. Detective Martin was shocked. He believed it could potentially be the weapon that had eluded investigators for 17 years. Back in Fort Wayne, Detective Martin began gathering additional information. Although initial test results showed that Stacy's DNA was not found on Holly's knife, the detective conducted further analysis. He later consulted Dr. Wagner, the chief pathologist on the case, who reviewed Stacy's autopsy photos. Wagner concluded that the knife was consistent with the stab wounds Stacy had suffered. On March 25, 2020, Holly, who was now 33 years old, was arrested. After years of silence, Amanda, a friend and the main witness, finally decided to speak up. She had been with Holly the night of the party and revealed that Holly had a knife with her that evening. She recalled Holly bringing the knife along when they arrived at the house and asking Amanda to hold it in her purse. Later, as she and another friend, Whitney, were preparing to leave, Holly asked for the knife back. Amanda saw nothing unusual about this and handed it over. As Amanda and Whitney were leaving, Stacy arrived at the house. Although Amanda remained silent for nearly 2 decades, her testimony could have helped the police solve the case much sooner. With Amanda's statement and additional evidence, authorities were able to reconstruct the incident leading up to Stacy's death. At the center of this tragic story was Brandon, a former graduate of Fort Wayne High School. He was the quintessential bad boy and, despite his flaws, attracted Stacy. Their relationship marked a turning point in Stacy's life, as she became involved with Brandon's social circle, a group known for their partying. Holly, who had dated Brandon before Stacy, still harbored feelings for him. Her lingering affection, coupled with Brandon's manipulative tendencies, deepened her resentment toward Stacy. He enjoyed the attention and often fostered rivalry between Holly and Stacy, which fueled his ego. This animosity came to a head on August 15, 2002. Stacy had received an invitation to a party despite her friends' concerns about its location. She chose to attend anyway. When she arrived, she found Holly with Brandon, further escalating the tension. An argument broke out and quickly turned violent. When Holly realized she was losing the fight, she stabbed Stacy twice with the knife. After years of investigation and consultation with Stacy's family, the Allen County Circuit Court offered Holly a plea bargain. She confessed to stabbing Stacy, which caused Stacy's death, and insisted that neither Brandon nor anyone else was involved. She acted alone. On January 14, 2022, Holly Boisvert was sentenced to 25 years in prison as part of the plea agreement, with 5 years suspended and 3 years of probation. Accounting for the time she has already served in credits for good behavior, she could be released as early as 2030. On October 30, 2011, David Swift reported his wife, Karen, missing after returning home from a Halloween party the previous night. That night, Karen had come home, put their daughter Ashley to bed, and slept with her. However, when David woke up the next morning, Karen was gone. Karen Swift was a 44-year-old mother of 4 from Dyersburg, Tennessee. She was cheerful and worked multiple jobs, including cleaning houses and teaching aerobics, to support her family. Friends described her as devoted and selfless, often prioritizing others' needs over her own. Despite her efforts to create a stable environment for her children, Karen's marriage to David was marked by conflict. David's controlling behavior became more evident. Friends observed that he was not supportive of Karen working outside the home, which increased tensions between them. David's actions became more erratic as he dealt with jealousy and insecurity about Karen's independence. Reports indicate that he started stalking her during outings and confronted her about her interactions with friends. This atmosphere of tension and control set the stage for the events that followed. Karen and David's relationship was marked by infidelity from both partners. David had previously had an affair that led to the birth of another child. Although they reconciled, their trust remained fragile. In October 2011, Karen filed for divorce due to ongoing marital issues, just 3 weeks before she vanished. This filing was a significant shift in their relationship, causing increased tension at home. David reportedly reacted poorly to the divorce, feeling threatened by Karen's desire for independence. On the night of October 29, 2011, Karen Swift went to a Halloween party in her small town of Dyersburg. She received a call from Ashley to pick her up from a friend's house late that night and fell asleep next to her when they returned home. In the early morning hours of October 30, 2011, David Swift called the police to report that his wife, Karen Swift, was missing. He expressed concern for her safety and was worried about where she might be. This call initiated a formal investigation into Karen's disappearance, prompting the police to gather information about her last known activities and interactions before she went missing. Around 3 p.m. on October 30th, police began their search for Karen Swift. They found her car abandoned on the side, about a quarter-mile from her family's home. The car had a flat tire due to a rusty screw lodged in it. When officers inspected the vehicle, they found no signs of foul play inside, but noted that Karen's keys and purse were missing. Forensic tests on the car did not reveal any blood or evidence of a struggle. The discovery of the abandoned car raised more questions about Karen's whereabouts and prompted investigators to widen their search in the nearby areas. David stated that he last saw Karen around 2 a.m. when she came home with their daughter, Ashley, after a Halloween party. David told the police that both Karen and Ashley went to bed shortly after arriving home. Later, during additional police interviews, David mentioned that he briefly checked on Ashley to ensure she was safe before going back upstairs to sleep. His version of events raised suspicions among investigators about the timeline of Karen's disappearance and whether he was involved. He also claimed he did not know of any plans Karen might have had for that night and was confused about her sudden absence. Witnesses reported a pattern of controlling behavior from David toward Karen. Friends described his jealousy and possessiveness, mentioning that he would often only call Karen while she was out with friends. They also noted instances of David stalking Karen, leading to serious confrontations in their relationship. These behaviors raised red flags about Karen's safety and were a significant part of the investigation into her disappearance. Detectives gathered evidence and recognized how crucial testimonies were for grasping the complexities of Karen and David's troubled marriage. After Karen went missing, David approached law enforcement and offered to assist in the search for his wife. Notably, he arrived at the local police station using crutches, claiming that he had re-injured his knee, which he had previously operated on a few months prior. The timing of this injury, coinciding with his wife's disappearance amidst their troubled relationship, raised suspicions. On December 10, 2011, the investigation into Karen Swift's disappearance took a significant turn when her remains were found in a cemetery less than 3 miles from the Swift family home. 2 hunters made the discovery and promptly informed the police. Investigators quickly arrived to secure the area, and forensic analysis later confirmed that the remains were those of Karen Swift. An autopsy revealed that Karen had suffered blunt force trauma to the head, which was ruled a homicide. This finding changed the nature of the investigation from a missing person case to a homicide case. The autopsy showed that the trauma Karen suffered would have been deadly. However, because a significant amount of time had passed since her disappearance, figuring out the exact details of her death was difficult. Investigators observed that there were no signs to suggest that the murder took place at the cemetery. It seemed Karen's body had been moved there after she died. Finding her remains brought renewed attention to David Swift as a suspect, particularly because the nature of her injuries and the location of her body raised important questions about his potential involvement. Investigators started to examine David's actions and statements more carefully, looking for any evidence that could connect him to her death. They discovered that Karen had obtained a second cell phone to prevent David from tracking her, which indicated her wish for privacy amid their troubled relationship. During the investigation, David claimed he didn't know about this second phone. However, authorities found that the number was saved in his work phone. During interviews with investigators, David seemed more concerned about Karen's actions than about her well-being. The detective pointed out that David's fixating on his wife's supposed drinking and partying suggested he might be hiding something. However, despite these observations, investigators faced challenges in finding physical or eyewitness evidence that connected David to the homicide, which hindered the progress of the investigation. In the months after Karen disappeared, David moved to Alabama and got remarried. He stayed involved in raising their daughter, Ashley, but did not provide any new information about Karen's case. Ashley wanted to learn more about what happened to her mother but felt increasingly hopeless about finding any answers. Authorities looked into David's claims about changes in Karen's behavior, particularly regarding her new friendships. Investigators examined this narrative to see if it was relevant to her disappearance. From December 16 to 20, 2011, forensic examinations took place at both the Swift home and Karen's vehicle. Investigators found no evidence of foul play in the house but noticed some mess in Karen's bedroom. They also found 7 gallons of bleach, which David claimed were for cleaning after a neighbor's dog poisoning incident. As the investigation continued in January 2012, law enforcement made public appeals for information about Karen's disappearance and death, hoping to find witnesses who had seen her or knew where she was last seen. However, the lack of solid evidence against David slowed the progress of the case. Authorities pursued various leads and collected testimonies suggesting David's possible involvement in Karen's murder. The investigation remained open throughout 2011 and 2012 as they worked to achieve justice for Karen Swift. On August 8, 2022, David Swift was charged with first-degree premeditated murder in connection to his wife's death, representing a major breakthrough in a case that had been unresolved for over a decade. This arrest surprised many in the community and Karen's family, who had struggled for years with uncertainty surrounding her disappearance. Ashley Swift, Karen's daughter, voiced her confusion and distress regarding her father's arrest. After years without a clear suspect, she found it hard to cope with the sudden shift in the investigation. The arrest also deeply affected the Dyersburg community. For over 10 years, residents had closely followed the case, often discussing it in search of answers about Karen's fate. The investigation's stagnation left many feeling frustrated and hopeless. Danny Goodman, the prosecutor at the time, believed that earlier investigators in Karen's case were waiting for a key piece of evidence that could prove David's guilt. However, as the case developed, it became clear that such evidence did not exist. The investigation was interrupted by global issue, causing everything, including Karen's case, to come to a standstill. Instead of halting their work, the prosecutors seized this time to examine about 30 large bins of files related to Karen's murder. Goodman confirmed that they never discovered any crucial evidence against David, but they did find that the case resembled a puzzle with a clear motive. Goodman was revealed that throughout their relationship, David had managed to control nearly every aspect of Karen's life. However, he began to realize that he was losing that grip. The combination of losing control, Karen's social activities, and the impending divorce increased his frustration, ultimately leading him to plot her murder. The prosecution built a clear case regarding the murder of Karen Swift. Here's how they believe the events unfolded. On October 30th, Karen received a call from Ashley, picked her up, and they both returned home, eventually falling asleep together in bed. While they were asleep, David moved Ashley to another room and then carried out his plan. He dragged Karen to the garage, brutally stomped on her head to make her death look like the result of an abduction. Afterward, he placed Karen's body in the car, drove to the cemetery, where he disposed of her body and covered it up to create the illusion that she had been kidnapped. In the days that followed, David approached the authorities and offered to assist in finding his wife's killer. The prosecution noted that he visited the authorities using crutches to suggest he could not have dragged Karen's body. He explained that he was on crutches due to a knee injury he had sustained after surgery months earlier. The prosecutors dismissed the idea that Karen left on her own or was abducted, arguing that several unlikely assumptions would need to be true for this theory to make sense. For example, if Karen had left voluntarily, she would have needed to have plans to meet someone, but there was no evidence of this. Additionally, if she didn't leave on her own, it was puzzling why she would move Ashley to another room. Another important factor to consider is that toxicology reports showed Karen had taken Benadryl before going to sleep. Benadryl is a sleep aid, so if Karen intended to go out after dropping Ashley off, it's puzzling why she would take a sleeping pill beforehand. To strengthen their theory of an alleged crime, prosecutors presented a substantial amount of evidence, most of which was circumstantial and gathered over 10 years ago. During the trial, it was shown that Karen's secret phone had no activity after she got into bed with Ashley. However, a forensic analysis revealed that the phone had been used and that a voicemail was called at 9:55 a.m. on October 30th. By this time, several hours had elapsed, and investigators had not yet located either Karen or her phone. Additionally, it was discovered that the phone had been connected to the family's Wi-Fi, and the only adult at home when the call was made was David. To support their claim that David faked an injury, the prosecution cited a neighbor's testimony. The neighbor reported seeing David move hay bales weighing around 60 pounds without using crutches. The prosecution put forward a circumstantial case suggesting that David committed murder. However, the defense challenged these allegations. The claims against David were primarily based on the idea that he was a controlling husband. His lawyer, Daniel Taylor, offered a different point of view, arguing that David was not trying to dominate Karen's life but was genuinely worried about his partner. During the trial, it was revealed that Karen struggled with alcoholism and partying. One neighbor reported finding her passed out and naked on their sofa during a party, which led to David being called to pick her up. Testimony suggested that Karen was involved in a buy and sell escort services ring and was interested in dating other men. The defense attorney argued that there was insufficient evidence to support the state's claims about the murder. He pointed out the inconsistency of a murder by stomping if there was no blood found in the garage or the car. He also challenged the prosecution's assertion that David staged an attempted abduction, noting there was no evidence to suggest he left the house that night. Taylor emphasized another critical point: the medical examiner, who originally determined the cause of Karen's death, no longer believed that she had been stomped on the head. The defense maintained that David, who was injured and on crutches, could not have stomped on Karen's head even if it had occurred, as his injured leg could not support his weight while attempting to stomp with the other leg. This argument was further supported by David's physical therapist, who testified that David had significant difficulty walking and lifting. The prosecution had presented a photo of bleach located near the pool, but Taylor argued that this evidence was not strong enough. The defense lawyer dismissed the idea that blood could have been cleaned up with bleach. Ashley contested the prosecution's claims, asserting that it was her mother who moved her to another room. Although her memory of the event was challenged, she insisted she recognized her mother's touch and firmly believed it was Karen who did it. Furthermore, Ashley argued that her father's injury was sufficient to counter the prosecution's assertion that he had attacked Karen. She pointed out that Karen was athletic, and at the time of the murder, her father was physically unable to overpower her. To highlight David's innocence, Taylor pointed out that the phone mentioned by the prosecution was based on unreliable evidence. He emphasized that David's condition made it impossible for him to have committed the murder, especially given the tenuous link between the phone and the crime. It is possible that Karen left her secret phone at her house after taking a sleeping aid, which could explain its presence. Furthermore, the defense argued that David was worried about his partner. So, he has called her to check her voicemail and locate her. The weakest part of the case against David Swift was the lack of physical evidence. Investigators found no incriminating evidence at the house, in the vehicle, or on David himself. There was also no murder weapon, leading prosecutors to suggest that David had used his foot, despite his visible physical limitations. Throughout the trial, David's defense maintained, despite the state's objections, that the charges were influenced by political motives. They argued that the sheriff and district attorney, both up for re-election, felt pressured to pursue the case without any direct evidence linking David to the crime. When the jury finished deliberating, they delivered an unexpected verdict. David Swift was acquitted of first-degree and second-degree murder, as well as attempted first-degree and second-degree murder. However, they could not reach a unanimous decision on the charge of voluntary manslaughter, and ultimately informed the judge of their deadlock. This indecision regarding the voluntary manslaughter allegations resulted in a mistrial in June 2024. Since then, there have been new developments in David Swift's case. His ex-wife, Kelly Essman, has accused him of stalking her. In an interview, Kelly shared that she met David on a dating site 3 years after Karen's death, and they married in 2016. In October 2024, the Tennessee Court of Appeals rejected a request from David's legal team to dismiss the voluntary manslaughter charge related to Karen's case, which he has pleaded not guilty to. This charge will be addressed in a new trial. David is currently in custody, waiting for the trial concerning the voluntary manslaughter charge, while also facing separate stalking charges from his ex-wife in Alabama. The complexities of both cases are being reviewed as everyone involved seeks justice. As for Ashley, she says she wants justice for her mother, but she also wants her father to come home and find a normal life. Meanwhile, Karen's friends are no longer sure what they believe. The tragic case of Karen Swift remains a haunting mystery in Dyersburg, Tennessee, marked by loss, suspicion, and lingering questions. Karen, a devoted mother whose vibrant spirit touched many, was taken too soon, her life ended by a brutal act that shattered her family and community. The investigation, spanning over a decade, pointed to her husband, David Swift, whose controlling behavior and questionable actions fueled suspicion, yet the absence of definitive evidence left justice elusive. The 2024 trial, ending in acquittals on murder charges and a mistrial on voluntary manslaughter, underscored the case's complexity, leaving Karen's daughter Ashley torn between seeking truth and longing for her father's return. Now, David faces a new trial and separate allegations. Karen's memory endures through those who loved her, a poignant reminder of the fragility of trust and the enduring quest for answers in the face of tragedy. Jessica Lynn Carpenter lived in Aiken with her parents and two older sisters. She was a senior at Aiken High School, where she participated in the school band. During the summers, she worked part-time as a hostess at Red Lobster, a local restaurant. As summer break came to an end, she was excited to start her final year of high school. On August 4, 2000, Jessica had lunch with her mother, Judy. After lunch, her mother went to work, leaving her home alone. Tragically, this was the last time Judy would see her daughter alive. When she returned home around 5:30 p.m., she walked inside and was met with a horrifying sight. Jessica was lying naked on the floor, lifeless. In shock and panic, Judy ran to her car and called 911. The 911 operator instructed Judy to go back inside and check whether Jessica was breathing. Despite her fear, Judy complied and followed the operator's guidance. She confirmed that Jessica showed no signs of life and was cold to the touch. Emergency responders quickly arrived at the scene, but Jessica was pronounced dead. The police began their investigation by searching the house to ensure the perpetrator was no longer present. Jessica had a telephone wire wrapped around her neck and had suffered a stab wound to her neck. She was unclothed, suggesting that the crime may have been motivated by abuse. Evidence of a violent struggle was found in Jessica's bedroom, kitchen, and living room, suggesting that she had fought back against her attacker. Investigators collected DNA samples from Jessica's body and some fingerprints at the scene, but physical evidence was scant. The most significant clue was an unidentified male DNA sample. Beyond this, detectives had limited leads. One critical observation stood out: there were no signs of forced entry. Jessica, typically vigilant about locking the doors when home alone, must have either known the perpetrator or felt comfortable enough to let them in. The crime shocked the quiet neighborhood, which was unaccustomed to such violence. Residents could hardly believe that such a horrifying incident had taken place in their community, where events like this were previously unheard of. During the forensic examination, it was confirmed that Jessica died as a result of internal bleeding and lack of oxygen. The house that was once filled with joy and laughter is now filled with pain and loss. The living room, once a space for warm family evenings and lively birthday celebrations, has now become the scene of a heartbreaking tragedy. Jessica's parents, Charlie and Judy, were consumed by sorrow, burdened by the belief that they had failed to protect their daughter. Jessica's sisters were heartbroken, but the tragedy brought the family closer together as they supported one another. They clung to hope, trusting that the police would uncover the truth and bring the person responsible for Jessica's death to justice. In Aiken, a small city, news of Jessica's murder spread rapidly. Local TV stations and newspapers extensively covered the incident. Law enforcement often relies on media coverage to seek assistance from the public in solving crimes, and this case was no exception. While detectives released some basic information about the crime to the press, critical details were withheld to preserve the integrity of the investigation. They kept secret the facts that Jessica had been shot in the neck, strangled with a telephone wire, and found unclothed. On August 25, 2000, 3 weeks after Jessica's murder, police received their first major tip through the media. Detectives obtained surveillance footage from a convenience store located just a few blocks from Jessica's house. In the footage, they noticed a young man in the upper right corner of the screen who caught their attention. Investigators believed he might hold information about Jessica's death. They sought to identify and question him as part of their investigation. Every lead, no matter how minor, was examined thoroughly in the hope of uncovering the truth. Using surveillance footage, the Aiken police created a sketch of the man and shared it on television, hoping someone would recognize him. Believing the sketch was key to uncovering the truth, detectives brought it to Aiken High School, where Jessica had been a student. At the school, they sought help from the principal. However, the principal did not recognize the individual in the sketch. Detectives then interviewed Jessica's classmates, believing that even the smallest detail could provide a clue. They focused on students who had participated in activities with Jessica, such as her bandmates, as well as her teachers. Despite spending hours searching the school for clues, no one was able to identify the man in the sketch. A few days later, the police identified the man from the footage, but he was found to have no connection to Jessica's death. He was simply a traveling student selling magazines. With few leads, investigators reached out to Jessica's close friends. Alice Bryant, one of Jessica's best friends since 6th grade, was questioned. Both Alice and Jessica were in the school orchestra, eagerly anticipating their senior year while focusing on college plans. When asked if Jessica had any enemies or conflicts, Alice firmly stated that Jessica got along with everyone and had no known disputes. This left investigators at another dead end. With no useful information from Jessica's friends, police turned their attention to the strongest piece of evidence they had, the DNA from an unidentified man found at the crime scene. After running the sample through a database, no matches were found. Believing that Jessica likely knew and trusted her killer, detectives began investigating people in her inner circle. DNA samples were collected from her family, friends, and neighbors. The investigation also extended to Jessica's mother Judy's workplace, where police interviewed all the male staff, including her supervisor, to rule out potential suspects. The Aiken police also worked with local media, encouraging men in the area to voluntarily provide DNA samples. Around 300 samples were tested, but none matched the DNA found on Jessica's body. This is disappointing because the culprit has yet to be discovered, leaving the investigation without any breakthrough. 2 months after Jessica's death, a similar crime took place in Georgia involving 18-year-old Chrysalie Barton. Remarkably, Chrysalie survived and was able to share her account with the police. She explained that she had met a man in a restaurant parking lot who offered her a modeling job. When she asked to see his identification, he refused. The man then asked if he could walk her home. Although hesitant, Chrysalie agreed, a decision she quickly regretted. Once inside her home, the man attacked her, tore off her clothes, and began strangling her. He also stabbed her 3 times before leaving, believing she was dead. However, Chrysalie survived. She crawled to the phone, called 911, and later provided a description of her attacker to the authorities. The similarities between this attack and the murder of Jessica were striking. Investigators suspected that the same man was responsible for both crimes. When the police released a sketch of the suspect, tips began pouring in. One notable tip came from one of Jessica's former co-workers at Red Lobster. She recognized the man in the sketch and recalled an incident from the week before Jessica's murder. According to the story, while she was chatting with Jessica on the street, the man approached her, asked for directions and suggested that one of them should go with him to show them the way. However, both refused. Realizing they worked at Red Lobster from their uniforms, the man walked away. A week later, Jessica was murdered. This raised serious questions for investigators. Was the encounter just a coincidence, or was it something more sinister? After broadcasting the sketch of the suspect on all major news outlets, the police made a significant breakthrough. 3 days later, they identified him as Reynaldo Rivera and placed him on the wanted list, determined to capture him before he could harm anyone else. His car was found parked at a motel. Officers quickly arrived and stormed the motel room where Reynaldo was staying. The television was showing the news, and the suspect's sketch was being aired again. By then, Reynaldo was lying unconscious on the floor. In an attempt to avoid arrest, he ended his life with a blade. Fortunately, the police arrived in time to save his life. Detectives immediately began investigating whether Reynaldo was connected to Jessica's death. He was born in Madrid, Spain, into a doctor's family. When he was 7, his family moved to Puerto Rico. At 19, he joined the U.S. Navy, serving in Orlando, Florida, and San Diego, California. Between 1986 and 1991, he worked for the Joint Chiefs of Staff in Washington, D.C., while attending the University of South Carolina, where he earned a degree in office administration. Over the years, he lived in Graniteville, Columbia, and Fayetteville, North Carolina, eventually settling in North Augusta. On Valentine's Day in 1993, he married Tammy Lisa Bonnet, and they had 2 children together. By 1998, he was working as a tire inspector for the Firestone Tire and Rubber Company in Aiken. However, no one suspected that he was living a double life. Jessica's family and the Aiken police were confident they had found her killer. But when investigators searched his motel room, they were startled to discover a note stating he had no connection to Jessica's death. He was initially arrested for assaulting Crisley Barton, and the police believed he might also be tied to Jessica's case, thinking the investigation was nearing its conclusion. However, instead of confessing to Jessica's murder, he shocked investigators by admitting to an entirely different string of unsolved crimes. On July 17, 1999, 17-year-old Melissa Faye Dinges from Graniteville, South Carolina, disappeared without a trace. During the search, deputies from the Aiken County Sheriff's Office reported seeing a girl matching Melissa's description. She was spotted twice with an older white man with dark hair. In the first sighting, she entered a tan, older model car. In the second, she was seen in a bright red, four-door car. On October 13, 2000, Melissa's skeletal remains were discovered in a wooded area off I-20 near Harlem, Georgia, about 7 miles west of the Savannah River. The location was confirmed after Reynaldo provided directions to the burial site. On December 4, 2000, 17-year-old Tiffany Sheares Wilson from Jackson, South Carolina, went missing while visiting a Winn-Dixie grocery store in North Augusta with her 2-month-old daughter, Caitlin. Her car was left in a parking lot, and witnesses reported seeing her get into a mid-1980s white, four-door Ford that quickly drove away. 3 days later, Caitlin was found abandoned in her mother's car at a Georgia Welcome Center, just across the state line. On December 30th, hunters discovered the body of a young woman in a heavily wooded area near Graniteville. Fingerprint analysis confirmed the remains as Tiffany's. On June 19, 2000, 18-year-old Tabitha Lee Bostel from Augusta, Georgia, disappeared under circumstances similar to the earlier victims. Her family said they had dropped her off at a Huddle house, where she planned to apply for a second part-time job before heading to her main job as a telemarketer. Her remains were later found and identified, leading to Reynaldo being charged in her case. On September 5, 2000, 21-year-old Marnie Marie Glista was assaulted in her home. She suffered severe injuries but initially survived and was taken to a local hospital. Tragically, she died from her injuries 5 days later, becoming Reynaldo's fourth known victim. On October 10, 2000, Reynaldo attacked Crisley Barton, who survived the encounter. Her survival allowed the police to create a sketch of the suspect. Reynaldo's victims were all young women of similar ages, and his attacks followed a consistent pattern, ultimately involving strangulation and stab wounds to the neck. At the age of 37, he was placed in solitary confinement under constant medical supervision to prevent further self-harm. Although he confessed to 5 additional crimes, he denied involvement in Jessica's murder. Police collected Reynaldo's DNA and rushed the sample to a lab for testing. For Jessica's family, the waiting was excruciating. Just as investigators thought they had solved the case, a new twist emerged, prolonging the mystery. Craig Gant, a police informant, notified authorities that a man named Tony Baldwin had confessed to murdering Jessica. At the time, Tony was already incarcerated in the Aiken County Jail, facing charges for another murder. Authorities collected DNA samples from him to determine if he was connected to Jessica's death. Meanwhile, police, friends, and Jessica's family anxiously await the results. By January 2001, the DNA test results for both suspects, Reynaldo and Tony, had been revealed, leaving the entire community on edge. In a surprising twist, both Reynaldo and Tony were cleared of any involvement, as their DNA did not match the evidence found at the scene or on Jessica's body. This outcome was deeply disappointing for Jessica's family and the investigators. Despite their efforts, weeks turned into months, and the case remained unsolved. 2 years after Jessica's death, on August 19, 2002, the detective working the case received a breakthrough phone call from the lab. They had found a DNA match. The DNA belonged to Robert Atkins, a man serving time in a Georgia prison. He had a criminal history that included theft and probation violations, which had resulted in his repeated imprisonment. Georgia, being one of the few states at the time to collect and store prisoners' DNA in a national database, ultimately linked Robert to Jessica's case. The discovery left investigators in shock, raising many questions. Why did Robert kill Jessica? How did he know her? Why had his name never surfaced during the investigation? A detective traveled to the Georgia prison to get answers. When questioned, he initially denied knowing Jessica. However, as the detective described the heartbreak endured by Jessica's mother, Judy, her overwhelming grief and inability to move on, he became emotional. He expressed remorse, broke down in tears, and asked for a break during the interview. Shortly afterward, he confessed to murdering Jessica. He later led investigators to the murder weapon, a bloody knife wrapped in a t-shirt and buried under a bush. Using Robert's confession, investigators pieced together the events leading up to the murder. A week earlier, Robert, an airborne express courier, had delivered a package to Jessica's home. On August 4, 2000, he returned under false pretenses. When she opened the door, he claimed that the package he delivered the previous week might have been a mistake. Jessica assured him there was no mistake. He then asked if he could use her phone, and she, not suspecting any harm, allowed him inside. While pretending to use the phone, he realized that she was alone. He attacked her, forced her into the bedroom, and made her undress. Despite her pleading and promising not to tell anyone, he refused her pleas. He then retrieved a knife from the kitchen, cut the phone cord, and used it to strangle her. Finally, he attacked her in the neck, left her body in the house, and took the knife with him as he fled. Shockingly, the following day, he got married and behaved as though nothing had happened. Jessica's kind and trusting nature, displayed in how she let Robert into her home and even offered him water, made her family even more heartbroken and furious over the brutal crime. On May 22, 2006, Robert agreed to a plea deal with prosecutors, pleading guilty to 5 charges. Facing the death penalty, he instead received a life sentence. Judge Diane Goodstein asked if he understood that he would spend the rest of his life in prison, confirming his understanding of the punishment. Ultimately, he was sentenced to 2 life terms. Meanwhile, Ronaldo Rivera, another criminal, had been sentenced to death in 2004. During his trial, he claimed mental illness and argued that doctors should study his condition to find a cure. He admitted to fantasizing about future killings and warned that he would kill again if released. Remarkably, Ronaldo even requested the death penalty. However, 12 years later, in 2016, he recanted his testimony and began efforts to appeal his sentence. Despite his attempts, in October 2024, the court rejected his final appeal.
It was a quiet night in the small town of Matapalo, Guanacaste, but inside one house, a terrible event was unfolding. A man had just assaulted his partner, while a child nearby attempted to escape. Suddenly, everything went silent. What occurred in that house? And how did the little girl manage to survive? Jessica Duran grew up in Costa Rica. From a young age, she experienced neglect, not because she lacked family, but due to a lack of proper care. Locals often saw her wandering the streets barefoot, unkempt, and hungry, frequently asking for food. She dropped out of school early and soon became involved in addiction. By age 13, she was often seen in local bars, dressed provocatively, smoking marijuana, drinking beer, and seeking clients. When she turned 20, she became pregnant for the first time. Little is known about that child, except that reports indicate the baby was taken in by the paternal grandmother. A year later, Jessica met a man at a bar. He was also using banned substance, and they began a tumultuous relationship. After 3 years, Jessica became pregnant again. However, before the baby was born, he was arrested and imprisoned for attempted homicide. Once again, the paternal grandmother took care of the baby. Despite the man being in prison, their relationship continued. During one conjugal visit, Jessica became pregnant again and gave birth to a daughter. This time, she was able to keep the child. Jessica and her daughter were homeless until an old friend offered them shelter. To support herself, Jessica returned to escort. Jessica then met Dirk Beauchamp, an American who had visited Costa Rica multiple times. He became very attached to her, and they soon moved in together. However, concerns arose when neighbors noticed that Jessica's daughter was being left alone for long periods. Eventually, the couple was evicted and moved to a new home in Matapalo. Jessica's family grew and she had 3 more children. Dirk accepted all 4 children, including Jessica's stepdaughter, and gave them his last name, Beauchamp. The community viewed him as a dedicated father, often seen walking his children to school, taking them to music lessons, and spending afternoons with them in the local plaza. However, Jessica had not changed. She continued to struggle with substance use, leading to noticeable drinking and erratic behavior that concerned neighbors. Meanwhile, the grandmother of her second child filed for child support. Jessica ignored the legal notice and was ultimately imprisoned in 2015 at El Buen Pastor, a women's prison in Costa Rica. While she was in jail, Dirk had to care for all 4 children by himself. Those who knew the family said he faced difficulties and sometimes couldn't provide even basic meals. Social workers from the National Child Welfare Agency came to evaluate the family's situation, but Dirk claimed everything was fine, likely out of fear that the authorities would take the children away. While still in prison, Jessica met a man named Michael Adrian Salmeron Silva. After she was released, she returned home not only pregnant with Michael's child, but also with him by her side. This marked the beginning of a new and tumultuous chapter in Jessica's life. She was open about her relationship with Michael, expressing how deeply in love she was with him, despite their shared struggles with addiction. Michael set up a makeshift living space next to the Beauchamp family home and moved freely between both residences, treating them as one. Even Jessica's mother disapproved of the relationship, which prompted Jessica to cut off all contact with her. Dirk, an older and naturally quiet man who avoids conflict, put up with the situation to remain near his children. He also welcomed Jessica's new baby, her daughter with Michael, into their home. However, as time passed, neighbors started to see a shift in Dirk. His previously warm and lively demeanor diminished. He looked more tired and was visibly affected, both physically and emotionally, by the unstable environment he was living in. On the morning of February 16, 2016 at 8:40 a.m., a social worker from the Costa Rican Social Security Fund arrived at the Beauchamp residence for a routine welfare check. He had visited this home many times to check on the children's health and ensure the family had basic support. However, this time felt different. The house was completely sealed and disturbingly quiet, with vultures circling overhead. Worried, he approached a nearby man who was taking care of livestock and asked if the silence was typical. The man shook his head. The children usually played outside. They moved closer to the fence, and then they heard it, a child crying inside. There were no other sounds, no voices, and no movement. Realizing the urgency of the situation, he quickly called emergency services. When the officers arrived, they heard a child's crying coming from beyond the fence. They shouted, threw stones onto the roof, and tried to get a response from inside, but no one answered. Realizing they couldn't wait any longer, they forced open the outer gate and carefully approached the house. Looking through a window, they saw a young girl crouched on the floor, her clothes dirty. They checked another window, which was swarming with flies, and noticed that her clothing was stained with blood. They used a metal bar to pry open a door, with their weapons ready, unsure if the attacker was still inside. As they moved closer to the child, they saw she had injuries on her head. All she requested was water. They surveyed the area and were horrified to find the mutilated body of an adult male nearby. It was Dirk. The officers moved further into the house. In the first bedroom, they found 2 bodies under a blood-stained sheet, Jessica and her 6-year-old daughter, both lying in a pool of blood. Disturbed, the officers stepped back and headed to the back of the house, where they heard a baby's cries. In a separate room, they discovered a 6-month-old infant lying alone on a bed. Fortunately, she seemed unharmed, even though they feared the attacker might still be inside. They continued their investigation. In the bathroom, they found the body of the oldest daughter. She was partially undressed and had multiple injuries. There was still one last room to check. Inside, there was more blood, with streaks and splatters leading to an adjacent bathroom. There, they found a boy's body. The house was silent now. No one else was there. The officers radioed their station to report the tragic scene. The little girl, who had been asking for water, finally received a drink. She attempted to sit up, but her injuries made it very difficult for her to move. First responders advised her to stay still, as they understood her injuries were likely more serious than they looked. While authorities gathered evidence and removed bodies from the Beauchamp home, the two young survivors of the tragic event were quickly taken to the hospital. The 4-year-old girl was in critical condition, barely conscious, and had multiple stab wounds to her chest, abdomen, arms, and head. Her 6-month-old sister was stable but severely dehydrated, having gone nearly 48 hours without food or water. Both girls were then transferred to the National Children's Hospital in San Jose for additional treatment. A year later, the police officer who responded to the scene reflected on the experience. There had been signs of trouble before. Jessica had filed a domestic violence complaint against her partner, Michael. Given the chaotic situation at home, Michael, who is 24 years old, became the main suspect in a case involving 5 murders. The bodies were found on February 16th, but forensic evidence indicated that the murders happened 2 days earlier, on the night of February 14th, Valentine's Day. Investigators quickly started to trace Michael's steps. Security footage from a store about 700 meters from his home showed that he visited 3 times that night, purchasing beer, soft drinks, cigarettes, and a phone card. Knowing that Michael could potentially escape the country, Costa Rican authorities issued an international arrest warrant the following day. Michael had a prior history of aggravated theft in Costa Rica. With an extradition request now in place, the search for him intensified. Within 48 hours, Nicaraguan authorities confirmed his arrest. While officials initially credited police efforts for the capture, Michael's father later disclosed that he was the one who turned him in. He claimed that Michael admitted to killing Jessica and the children out of jealousy while under the influence of banned substance and alcohol. Despite his father's assertions of remorse, Michael did not display any emotion in the days after his arrest. When he was presented to the media, he appeared emotionless, maintaining a cold demeanor and showing no signs of regret. Michael was detained at the prison in Nicaragua as he awaited his trial. On March 30th, a pre-trial hearing took place, attended by Costa Rican officials. The highlight of this hearing was the expected testimony from Jessica's daughter, the living witness to the massacre, who is only 4 years old. She connected through video from the Children's Hospital in Costa Rica, along with a judge and a psychologist. During her testimony, she clearly identified Michael as the person responsible for the attacks. She recounted how he first stabbed her mother, followed by Dirk, and then her siblings. She described the violent events in disturbing detail, even specifying the body parts where each family member had been injured. Throughout this, Michael remained completely still. Extradition was quickly dismissed as an option. Similar to Costa Rica, Nicaragua's constitution does not allow the extradition of its own citizens for trial in other countries. As a result, Michael's trial would happen in Nicaragua. Costa Rican officials began sending all relevant evidence, witness statements, and investigative documents to their Nicaraguan counterparts to facilitate the legal process. On April 19th, a preliminary hearing was held. The prosecutor presented the charges in distressing detail: 5 counts of murder, 1 count of attempted murder, 1 count of aggravated abuse, and 1 count of endangering a person's safety. On the night of February 14th, the official report states that Michael entered the bedroom where Jessica was sleeping next to her 6-year-old daughter. He was armed with a kitchen knife and stabbed Jessica twice, once in the collarbone and once in the chest. As Jessica fell, the girl tried to help her mother but was attacked by Michael, who stabbed her 5 times in the back. Michael then turned his focus to Dirk, hearing the screams. Dirk grabbed a second kitchen knife to protect his family. However, he could not compete with Michael, who was younger, stronger, and fueled by something evil. Dirk initially sustained minor injuries, but then Michael struck with deadly accuracy. He stabbed Dirk in the left arm, made deep cuts to his neck and side of his head, and delivered 8 brutal blows to his back, another 8 to his chest. In total, Dirk suffered 19 stab wounds that led to his death. Michael's violent rampage turned into a horrific nightmare. He targeted 8-year-old Jessica's son, who tried to escape to his bedroom but was cornered. In a desperate attempt to protect himself, the boy was slashed on the hand. Though he made it to the bathroom, Michael continued to attack, stabbing him 3 times in the back, 7 times in the chest, hitting his lungs and heart. Next, he turned his attention to 12-year-old another girl, who was hiding in a locked room. Michael broke in and stabbed her 3 times in the back before abusing her. The brutality escalated as he struck her 9 times in the head and 5 times in the chest. Afterward, he dragged her body to the bathroom, placed it in the shower, and attempted to wash away the blood. The violence persisted. 4-year-old the girl was hiding behind a door in another room. When Michael discovered her, he pulled her by the hair and slammed her against the wall. Then he used a knife, cutting her head, neck, body, and arms. The child lost consciousness, and Michael thought she was dead. He only spared one child, 6-month-old. The baby has been his biological daughter, which could explain why she was not harmed. As the prosecutors recounted the events in court, the atmosphere was filled with disbelief and sorrow. Everyone, except for Michael, listened intently to the horrific details, while Michael remained expressionless. In the meantime, the bodies of Jessica and her children were returned to her family, with Jessica's mother taking responsibility for their burial. Since U.S. authorities could not find any relatives for Dirk, he was buried next to Jessica and her children, with her family's permission. The 4-year-old girl faced a challenging path to recovery. A stab wound to her skull had left her partially paralyzed on the left side of her body. She was hospitalized for 3 months, and doctors were hopeful about her physical recovery. However, the emotional scars ran much deeper. She had witnessed her family's brutal murder, endured her own vicious attack, and spent 2 days at the scene before being rescued. The hospital staff affectionately called her the Little Champion as she gradually began to regain her smile and mobility. Like her younger sister, she was placed in a caring, temporary home. Authorities began looking into adoption options, considering keeping the sisters together. Jessica's mother sought custody of the girls, but ultimately, in 2018, Costa Rica's Child Welfare Agency decided that separate adoptions would be in the girls' best interests. They concluded that none of Jessica's family members were equipped to address the girls' complex emotional needs. Given Jessica's own difficult upbringing, officials believed they were making the safest choice for their future. The girls' former home, where the massacre occurred, became a grim landmark. It stood silently, serving as a painful reminder of the tragedy. Locals shared stories of strange occurrences there, including sightings of the family's spirits near the site. Meanwhile, legal proceedings for Michael were moving forward. On June 10, 2016, a special hearing took place where he admitted to the killings. His defense team requested lighter sentences in exchange for his confession, but prosecutors sought the maximum penalties: 25 years for Jessica's femicide, 30 years for Dirk's murder, 15 years for the girl's abuse, plus 30 years for her murder, 30 years for the boy's murder, 30 years for the girl's murder, 20 years for the attempted murder of the girl, and 3 years for abandoning infant. In total, they requested a sentence of 183 years. On July 16, 2017, more than a year after the tragic massacre, justice was served when Nicaraguan judge sentenced Michael Adrian Salmeron Silva to 183 years in prison, meeting the prosecution's request. For the first time, Michael reacted by bowing his head and tapping his fingers on the table, likely contemplating the lengthy prison term ahead. However, under Nicaraguan law, the maximum prison sentence is 30 years, which means Michael could be released at the age of 55 unless laws change. The town of Matapalo will always remember the children who once filled their plaza with laughter, music, and kindness. Dirk, the American father, sacrificed everything to protect the children he loved and died alongside them. Following the tragedy, a debate emerged over who was responsible. Was it solely Michael, the decisions made by Jessica, the impact of banned substance and alcohol, or a broader cycle of neglect and violence that spiraled out of control?
On June 9, 2008, In Mesa, Arizona, concerns grew among Travis Alexander's friends when they realized they had not heard from him in 5 days. This was unusual for the outgoing young man who typically stayed connected. After several ignored calls and messages since June 4th, concerned friends decided to visit him. When they arrived at his home, everything outside looked normal. They rang the doorbell several times but got no answer. Before leaving, one of the friends recalled that a mutual acquaintance knew the garage door code. After explaining the situation, that friend agreed to come over and assist. As soon as they entered the garage, a strong, unpleasant smell overwhelmed them. Initially, they thought it might be from Alexander's dog. However, as they climbed the stairs, the smell grew worse, indicating something was seriously wrong. They knocked on Alexander's bedroom door, but got no response. Inside, they discovered a large pool of blood soaking into the carpet, leading to the bathroom. In the shower, they found Alexander's body. He had 29 stab wounds, a deep cut across his throat that severed major blood vessels, and a gunshot wound above his left eyebrow. His fingers and toes had darkened, indicating he had been dead for several days. They immediately called 911. The dispatcher asked Alexander if he was suicidal or if someone was angry enough to hurt him. Alexander's friends mentioned Jodi Arias by name as a possible suspect, saying Alexander had told them she had stalked him, accessed his Facebook account, and slashed his tires. When the authorities arrived, there were no signs of forced entry, and the house appeared undisturbed, suggesting that the killer was someone Travis knew and trusted. Blood spatter covered the hallway and bathroom walls. A bloody left-hand palm print was found on the wall. The bathroom sink was stained. Long strands of dark hair, likely from a woman, were discovered in the shower and on the floor. Police also found a digital camera inside the washing machine, which was soaked and seemingly damaged. Forensic technicians were able to recover several images from its memory card. The photos taken on June 4th showed Travis and Jodi Arias, his ex-girlfriend, in intimate poses, with the final image, time-stamped at 5:29 p.m., capturing Travis alive in the shower, followed by accidental shots believed to have been taken moments after the attack began. DNA samples were collected from all individuals who had contact with Alexander. Jodi's name surfaced frequently during the investigation. Alexander had ended their relationship months prior, citing her obsessive and controlling behavior. Before the police could contact Jodi, she reached out to authorities herself. She expressed her devastation and offered to assist, claiming that the last time she saw Alexander was in April. Jodi Arias was born on July 9, 1980, in Salinas, California, to William and Sandra Arias. She grew up in what seemed to be a stable household. However, Jodi later claimed that she was physically abused by her parents starting at the age of 7. From a young age, she developed a strong interest in photography, which she continued to pursue throughout her teenage years. In the fall of 2001, she began working as a waitress in Carmel, California. In September 2006, Jodi met 29-year-old Alexander at a company conference in Las Vegas, Nevada. They felt an immediate attraction to each other. Alexander, a successful motivational speaker, had a challenging upbringing. He was one of 8 children raised by banned substance-addicted parents and later lived with his devout Mormon grandmother after his parents divorced. He embraced the teachings of the church and used his difficult experiences to motivate others. Despite the challenges he faced, Alexander worked hard to create a stable life and became an example of personal growth. After the conference, they exchanged phone numbers, even though Alexander lived in Arizona and Jodi in California. A week later, they met again and became physically intimate that night. After maintaining constant communication through texts, calls, emails, and daily interactions, Jodi was baptized into the Mormon Church on November 26, 2006, hoping this would make her more compatible with Alexander. 3 months later, they officially became a couple, and Jodi moved to Mesa, Arizona, to be closer to him. However, things soon took a turn for the worse. Jodi found messages from another woman on Alexander's phone and accused him of infidelity. This led to a dramatic change in her behavior. She became more jealous, possessive, and emotionally unstable. She often checked his phone, questioned where he was, and expressed her anger frequently. Alexander, who had initially been hopeful about their relationship, started to feel trapped. He shared with friends that Jody was distancing him from his faith, and he began to doubt if she was the right person for him. Their relationship officially ended just a few months later, but they continued to have secret intimate encounters, often traveling together for work. Jody believed they had a future together, while Alexander started dating other women. He believed that Jody had vandalized his car by slashing his tires twice, sending anonymous threatening emails to him and his new partner. Friends remembered him mentioning that she had once broken into his house by crawling through the doggy door. Despite these warning signs, their physical relationship persisted. They shared intimate photos, and Jody continued to obsess over him. By mid-2008, Alexander told his friends that Jody had hacked into his social media accounts. He expressed feeling haunted by her and was unsure how to escape the situation. Alexander and Jody's relationship ended when he invited another woman to join him on a trip. Initially, Alexander intended to take Jody, but he changed his plans at the last minute. When Jody found out she had been replaced, she was furious. On May 28, 2008, there was a reported burglary at Jody's grandparents' home in Yreka, California, where she was staying at the time. A handgun was among the stolen items. On the morning of June 2nd, Jody left her grandparents' house at 5:39 a.m. and traveled to Redding, California, where she rented a car at 8:04 a.m. She opted for a discreet-colored vehicle instead of a red one. Jody also brought gasoline containers with her, which was unusual and indicated her plan to hide her travel route. She told friends she was going to Utah to meet a colleague who worked with her in prepaid legal services. In reality, her destination was Mesa, Arizona, an 11-hour drive away. The gas canisters allowed her to refuel without stopping at public gas stations, avoiding security cameras and leaving no digital payment trail. On June 3, 2008, between 1 a.m. and 3 p.m., Jody Arias called Travis Alexander 4 times, but he did not answer. Later, he returned her calls, leading to an 18-minute conversation followed by a 41-minute chat. The content of their discussion is unknown, but events that followed were significant. On June 4th, Jody arrived in Salt Lake City to meet her colleague, Ryan Burns. He immediately noticed something unusual about her. Her hands had cuts. When he asked about her injuries, she casually claimed they were from broken glass at work. Despite, she appeared cheerful and even more energetic than usual. That same day, Alexander missed a scheduled conference call, which worried his friends as he was known for being punctual and professional. Days went by without any contact from him. On June 9th, his body was found in his home in Mesa, Arizona, in a horrific scene that shocked his community. On June 17th, Jody voluntarily provided her DNA and fingerprints to the investigators. At that time, she was not considered a primary suspect. Her willingness to cooperate and calm demeanor seemed at odds with the description of her as an erratic, possessive person by Alexander's friends. However, this perception changed just 2 days later. Forensic technicians were able to recover deleted images from Alexander's damaged digital camera. One of the final images revealed his bloody body on the bathroom floor, while another image seemed to show Jody's foot. When police reached out to Jody again, she denied being in Mesa at the time of the murder, claiming she was in Salt Lake City and that Ryan Burns could confirm her alibi. Burns supported her story but noted her unusual hair color and the cuts on her hands. However, lab results revealed more incriminating evidence. A bloody palm print at the crime scene contained DNA from both Jody and Alexander. By July 15, 2008, investigators had gathered enough evidence to formally question Jody. Detective Esteban Flores led the interrogation, challenging her timeline and pointing out an unexplained 18-hour gap during her trip from California to Utah. Cell phone records indicated that her phone had been turned off for an extended period, likely to prevent leaving a digital trace. Despite being confronted with forensic evidence, blood, fingerprints, and photos, Jody continued to deny any involvement. She claimed the images were altered and that she was unaware of what had happened. Eventually, she broke down in tears. What happened next astonished everyone watching the surveillance footage. When Jody was left alone in the interrogation room, her behavior became strange. She knelt on the floor, sang to herself calmly, and talked as if someone else was present. When informed she would be photographed for booking, she asked if she could put on makeup, smiling and asking, "How do I look?" before the camera captured her image. In the days that followed, her account changed. Initially, she admitted she was with Alexander the night he died, but then she created a new story. She claimed that two masked intruders, one male, one female, broke into the house, killed Alexander. They threatened her by saying they would harm her family if she spoke. She said she had hidden in a closet during the attack and left only after the intruders were gone. However, despite her tears and shaky voice, her story had inconsistencies. Eventually, Jody changed her narrative again. This time, she confessed to killing Alexander but claimed it was in self-defense. She stated that he had attacked her in a fit of rage, prompting her to fight back. She couldn't remember the details, only that she later found herself driving with blood on her hands and no clear recollection of what had happened. After killing Travis Alexander, Jody Arias fled into the desert. During her escape, she stopped her car, changed her clothes, and threw the blood-stained clothes into a dumpster. She then continued driving toward her destination. Soon after, she appeared in front of the media, confidently claiming her innocence. Jody told reporters that the evidence would prove her guiltlessness and insisted that no jury could ever convict her. Despite her efforts to create an alibi, carefully plan her route, and eliminate any evidence of her actions, the reality of the situation was much worse than she expected. As investigators pieced together the events of June 4th, a disturbing sequence of actions unfolded. That afternoon, Jody and Alexander were intimate, as they had been many times before, and took several pictures together. Afterward, Alexander went into the shower. While he was showering, Jody retrieved a knife she had hidden in her clothing. Under the guise of continuing their photo session, she entered the bathroom. The last photo captured Travis sitting in the shower just moments before she attacked him. Jody struck him with brutal force. He put up a struggle, as evidenced by defensive wounds on his hands. Bloodied and disoriented, he stumbled out of the shower towards the sink, coughing up blood and staining the counter. Despite his attempts to call for help, he couldn't get the words out. As he tried to escape down the hallway, Jody followed him and repeatedly stabbed him in the back. She ultimately pulled his head back and slit his throat, leaving a large pool of blood on the carpet. In her attempt to drag his body back to the bathroom, Jody pressed her bloody hand against the wall for support, leaving a crucial palm print that contained both her DNA and Alexander's. During the struggle, the camera they had used earlier fell over, capturing a blurry image of Jody's foot next to Alexander's blood-soaked body. After witnessing him convulsing from his injuries, she fired a final attack into his forehead. The entire attack lasted approximately 2 minutes and 34 seconds. Jody Arias's trial started on January 2013. Her defense argued that she acted in self-defense. She admitted to killing Alexander but claimed he attacked her after she accidentally dropped his camera. According to her, he became furious, hit her, and broke her finger. Fearful for her safety, she said she ran to his closet, took a gun she said was his, and fired in desperation. When he continued to approach her, she said she stabbed him but could not remember how or when it happened. The prosecutors disagreed, arguing that the evidence suggested her actions were planned and deliberate. Witnesses testified that she had borrowed gas canisters, indicating she intended to drive a long distance without stopping to avoid detection. Audio recordings and text messages showed a complicated and toxic relationship between Jody and Alexander. While Jody portrayed herself as a victim of abuse, the prosecutors pointed out her obsessive behavior and manipulative history. At one stage, she even accused Alexander of being a child abuser, a claim that lacked evidence and complicated the emotional context of the trial. To support her defense, Jody's lawyers claimed she experienced memory loss due to severe psychological trauma. A clinical psychologist testified that she might have had an acute stress response, which could have triggered a fight or flight reaction that affected her memory. He indicated that she showed signs of anxiety resulting from long-term trauma. In contrast, the prosecution's psychologist diagnosed her with borderline personality disorder, describing her as emotionally unstable, manipulative, and prone to extreme, unpredictable behavior. During the trial, Jodi spent 18 days on the witness stand, often contradicting herself and displaying exaggerated emotions. The jury found her guilty of first-degree murder on May 8, 2013. All 12 jurors found her guilty of first-degree murder. 7 of the 12 found her guilty of felony murder. As the verdict was read, Alexander's family smiled and hugged each other. The crowd outside the courtroom began cheering and chanting. However, during sentencing, the jurors were unable to agree on whether she should receive the death penalty. The trial's aggravating phase began on May 15, 2013. The only witness was the medical examiner who performed Alexander's autopsy. Jodi's attorneys, who had repeatedly asked to withdraw from the case, gave only a brief opening statement and a closing argument in which they said the adrenaline rushing through Alexander's body may have prevented him from feeling much pain while he died. Prosecutor Martinez showed the jury photos of the body and the crime scene, then paused for 2 minutes to illustrate the time he claimed Alexander died. On May 23, during the sentencing phase of Jodi's trial, the jury could not reach a unanimous decision, leading the judge to call for a retrial for that part of the case. The jury eventually voted 8-4 in favor of the death penalty. After being dismissed, jury foreman Zavakos expressed that the jury found the decision regarding the death penalty to be very challenging and were frustrated that their work resulted in a retrial. On October 21, 2014, Jodi Arias's retrial started with opening statements and an evidentiary hearing. During the first trial, the prosecution's witness, Amanda Webb, had been called to counter Jodi's claim that she returned a tank of gas to Walmart on May 8, 2007. However, she admitted she was unsure if all the store's records had been transferred after its relocation. The trial resumed in January 2015. Experts from the Mesa Police revealed that Alexander's laptop contained viruses and adult content, which contradicted testimonies from the first trial in 2013. Jury deliberations began on February 12, 2015. On March 2, 2015, the jury informed Judge Stevens that they were unable to reach a unanimous decision. Jodi's attorneys requested a retrial. Judge Stevens denied this request, provided the jury with additional instructions, and instructed them to continue their discussions. By March 5, 2015, Judge Stevens declared a retrial because the jury, after deliberating for about 26 hours over 5 days, had reached a deadlock with an 11-1 vote in favor of the death penalty. The 11 jurors who supported the death penalty tried unsuccessfully to have the lone dissenting juror removed, claiming she was biased. By this time, the total cost of Arias's trials had reached approximately $3 million. Sentencing for Jodi Arias was set for April 7, 2015. Judge Stevens had 2 options: life in prison without the possibility of parole, or life with the possibility of parole after 25 years. On April 13, Stevens chose to sentence Arias to life in prison without the possibility of parole. In June 2015, after a restitution hearing, Jodi was ordered to pay over $32,000 to the siblings of Alexander. Her attorneys argued that this amount was about 1/3 of what had been requested. On July 6, 2018, Jodi's current attorneys, Margaret M. Green, also known as Peg Green, and Corey Engel, filed a 324-page appeal to the Court of Appeals, seeking to overturn her murder conviction. On October 17, 2019, her attorneys argued that the conviction should be overturned because the prosecutor, Martinez, had acted improperly during the trial, contributing to a media frenzy that affected the trial's outcome. However, on March 24, 2020, the court ruled that despite the prosecutor's egregious misconduct, Jodi Arias had been convicted based on overwhelming evidence of her guilt, and they upheld the conviction. Finally, on November 4, 2020, the Arizona Supreme Court decided not to review the case. As of 2023, Jodi is incarcerated at the Arizona Department of Corrections, located at the Arizona State Prison Complex Perryville. She began her sentence at the complex's maximum security lonely unit. The drive to achieve one's goals at any cost can lead people to commit shocking acts and betrayals. It can be hard to grasp the length someone will go to achieve their dreams, especially when it endangers the lives of others. Today's story is about a tragic murder that shocked all of Brazil. The impact was felt most deeply in the small town of São João Batista. For this close-knit community, the crime is one of the most brutal and unprecedented events in history. Flavia Godinho Mafra was born on April 19, 1996, in São João Batista, a peaceful town in the southern Brazilian state of Santa Catarina, grew up in Canalinha. As the youngest child in a large, loving family, her parents worked hard to support their children. Flavia was kind, friendly, and outgoing. She excelled in her studies and had a passion for music, always surrounded by friends. From a young age, she dreamed of becoming a teacher and had no plans to leave her hometown. After attending a local teacher training college, she graduated and began teaching at the elementary school she had once attended. At 20, Flavia met Valdeli Mafra. They quickly fell in love and started dating. In the summer of 2019, Valdeli proposed, and Flavia happily accepted. They got married that October, and just 2 months later, they received wonderful news: they were going to have a baby. Their joy was beyond words. In another development, Rosalba Maria Grime was born in 1994 in Canalinha, a town in Santa Catarina. There is little information available about her early life or family background. From a young age, she was seen as unusual. People often felt she exaggerated stories, fabricated achievements, and sought to appear more important, making it hard for them to take her seriously. As she grew older, Rosalba increasingly craved attention by playing on others' sympathy. She would create tales of personal struggles and serious health issues she claimed to be facing. In one troubling incident, she tried to prevent a boyfriend from leaving by telling him she had a terminal illness, begging for his companionship during what she described as her final months. When her deception continued for a long time, she suddenly claimed to have made a miraculous recovery. In 2017, Rosalba married Zulmir Schiestel, a quiet, shy man who was easygoing and agreeable. Rosalba had taken the initiative to propose the marriage, and Zulmir simply nodded in agreement. They moved into a small home in a peaceful residential area on the outskirts of town. Rosalba worked as a librarian at a local school. However, her co-workers had mixed feelings about her, primarily because of her dominant demeanor and reputation for being dishonest. For the first 3 years of their marriage, Rosalba struggled to conceive, with doctors suggesting that she might never be able to have children. Therefore, when she discovered in the fall of 2019 that she was pregnant, she was filled with joy. She quickly shared the exciting news with her family, friends, and co-workers. Overcome with happiness, Rosalba even posted a picture of her positive pregnancy test on social media, announcing it to everyone she knew. In the weeks that followed, she was inundated with congratulations for her and the baby. Her husband and family treated her like a queen, shielding her from stress, taking care of everything for her. Even co-workers who had not been particularly friendly with her before began to show kindness, recognizing how long she had hoped to be a mother. In December of that year, Rosalba faced a heartbreaking event. She suffered a miscarriage in her 3rd month of pregnancy, leaving her deeply shocked and silent about her loss. Instead of sharing her pain, she chose to act as if she were still pregnant. She seemed determined to maintain the facade, perhaps knowing she might not have another chance to conceive. To support her ruse, she started wearing loose clothing and eating more to create the appearance of being pregnant. Meanwhile, a troubling plan began to emerge in her mind. About 2 months after she lost the baby, news spread at the school about the pregnancy of a young teacher named Flavia, who received many congratulations. Until that point, Rosalba and Flavia were not close. They had rarely interacted. However, Rosalba shared several fabricated stories in order to gain sympathy. She added Flavia on social media and began messaging her every day, suggesting they go for walks or chat since their due dates were similar. Rosalba asserted that they would have much in common. Flavia was initially hesitant to have lunch with Rosalba because of her eccentric reputation, but she eventually agreed during a work break. They exchanged phone numbers, and Rosalba shared several fabricated stories to gain sympathy. The only true part of her stories was that she had struggled for years to conceive and had longed for this pregnancy. Of course, she did not mention the miscarriage. Initially, they met infrequently, despite seeing each other at work almost every day. It later emerged that Rosalba had also connected with two other expectant mothers from the same town on social media, who she believed were at a similar stage in their pregnancies. She attempted to build friendships with them by inviting them out and asking to visit their homes. Rosalba claimed she was having a daughter. However, when she discovered that both women she had met online were having boys, she abruptly cut off contact with them. Shortly after, she found out that Flavia was expecting a girl, and from that point on, Rosalba became completely fixated on her. As time went on, it became harder for Rosalba to keep up the pretense of being pregnant. She frequently searched online for symptoms and experiences that expectant mothers often report. She would share these with her husband, family, and co-workers as if they were her own. Over several months, she gained nearly 30 pounds, but her appearance still didn't fully resemble that of someone in the later stages of pregnancy. Her husband insisted on joining her for doctor's appointments. He wanted to see the baby on the ultrasound, but Rosalba had to come up with excuses to maintain the deception. Zomir was a trusting man who loved his wife and believed everything she said, which made it easier for her to keep him unaware of the truth. She would tell him that appointments had been cancelled or rescheduled due to the clinic being overbooked or the doctor being unavailable. At times, she claimed she was lucky enough to get a last-minute appointment while he was at work, and he believed her every time. To strengthen her story, Rosalba began creating fake notes on her phone that appeared to be from her doctor, including recommendations, appointment confirmations, and cancellations. Although she didn't have a strong grasp of medical terminology, often made spelling and factual errors, Zomir wasn't familiar with medical details, so he had no reason to question her. To maintain the deception and avoid raising suspicion, Rosalba even sent messages to her husband pretending to be the doctor. In one message, she suggested that they temporarily pause their intimate relationship to minimize any risks to the pregnancy. He accepted this advice, believing it was from a medical expert. Rosalba developed an obsession with shopping for baby items such as onesies, diapers, bottles, pacifiers, blankets, and toys. She frequently visited stores with her husband, mother, or sister, but eventually, all her attention turned to Flavia. In July 2020, Rosalba organized an emotional maternity photo shoot. In the photos, she wore a flowing pregnancy gown and held tiny baby booties and a onesie while her husband lovingly embraced and kissed her belly, while she smiled sweetly for the camera. Everything appeared so genuine that no one suspected anything amiss. Those photos would later become part of the criminal case files. By early June 2020, Flavia and Rosalba were almost inseparable, spending time together every day, sharing thoughts, and planning for the future. However, it was always Rosalba who took the initiative. Flavia, being kind and empathetic, found it hard to say no. Whenever she tried to reschedule, Rosalba would play on Flavia's sympathy, claiming she was going through personal issues, needed someone to talk to, which worked every time. Rosalba was closely watching Flavia, asking her about her symptoms, doctor visits, and medical tests. She would then share those details with her own family and husband as if they were her own experiences. Rosalba imitated Flavia's walk, mannerisms, food cravings, and even how she held her back or moved awkwardly. Valdelli disapproved of his wife's new friendship and was upset about the time they spent together, which created tension in their marriage. They argued about it several times, but Flavia, being gentle and compassionate, couldn't bring herself to reject or ignore Rosalba. By mid-July, Rosalba had told people that she was due to deliver her baby, but she concocted another lie, claiming that the doctors had incorrectly calculated her due date. Meanwhile, she was secretly planning something disturbing, a scenario so dreadful. In August, Rosalba started planning a surprise celebration for Flavia to honor Flavia's upcoming baby. She chose decorations, invited guests, and set up a special photo area. Flavia, wanting to be polite, initially tried to decline the party. However, Rosalba became emotional, claiming she had put in a lot of effort and truly wanted to give Flavia a meaningful experience. Eventually, Flavia reluctantly agreed, unaware of the twists ahead. The celebration was scheduled for August 27, 2020. Rosalba managed all the details, promised to send the location and final arrangements to the guests. However, the day before the event, Rosalba contacted each guest and claimed the celebration had to be postponed due to unexpected issues. She assured them she would provide a new date and time soon. Her explanation was convincing, and no one questioned it, nor did anyone reach out to Flavia, who remained completely in the dark. On August 27th, at the originally planned time, Rosalba picked up Flavia, telling her they were going to the baby shower. Because it was meant to be a women-only event, Flavia's husband, Valdelli, stayed home. He walked his heavily pregnant wife to Rosalba's car, completely unaware this would be the last time he saw her. As they drove, Flavia was oblivious to their destination. Rosalba said it was a surprise, and a few minutes into the drive, she suggested Flavia wear a blindfold to keep it a secret. Flavia hesitated but eventually agreed, not sensing any danger. During the drive, Rosalba kept the conversation light to help Flavia feel relaxed and avoid raising any suspicions. They went to an abandoned ceramics warehouse in Canalinha's Galera neighborhood. After helping Flavia out of the car while she was still blindfolded, Rosalba guided her into one of the old buildings. The silence and strange smell likely made Flavia uneasy. When she reached up to take off the blindfold, Rosalba suddenly struck her head with a heavy brick. Rosalba hit she multiple times until she collapsed on the floor. In a final act of violence, Rosalba punched her in the face. It seemed Rosalba had wanted to hurt her as much as possible, despite once calling her a friend. Without checking if Flavia was still alive, Rosalba hurried to carry out the next phase of her horrific plan. She had brought a box cutter, some rags, and a blanket to the scene. With a steady hand, she began to cut into her friend, Flavia. Rosalba had no medical training, no understanding of anatomy, and no idea how a C-section was performed. Despite this, she started slicing into Flavia's abdomen with the box cutter, trying to retrieve the baby. She acted aggressively, using too much force and lacking precision. The box cutter, unlike a surgical instrument, tore through the skin rather than creating clean cuts. Rosalba had completely misunderstood the reality of what she was attempting. What she thought would be a quick procedure turned out to be chaotic and messy. The process took much longer than she expected, and her frustration grew, resulting in her accidentally cutting the baby several times while trying to pull her out. The environment was entirely unsanitary. Rosalba didn't even attempt to clean the tools she had brought. The fact that the baby survived the ordeal was nearly miraculous. After finally extracting the baby, she wrapped the newborn in the blanket and placed her in the back seat of her car. Rosalba then wiped her hands as best as she could, changed into clean clothes she had brought from home, and threw her blood-stained outfit into the trunk. She paused to rehearse her story before heading to the hospital. In her haste, Rosalba forgot to properly close the trunk of her car, and while waiting at a red light, it popped open enough to expose the bloodied clothing inside. Passengers in the car behind her noticed this and immediately called the police, providing a description of the vehicle and the direction it was heading. Minutes after Rosalba arrived at the hospital, officers intercepted her at the entrance as she carried a blood-soaked bundle in her arms. She told them it was her baby and that the newborn needed urgent medical attention. Officers escorted her to the emergency room while they waited nearby. With a trembling voice and tears in her eyes, Rosalba explained to the medical staff that she had gone into sudden labor and didn't have time to reach the hospital in advance. She said the baby had fallen onto gravel during her rush trip to the car, and in a panic, she had wrapped the baby in the first blanket she found before driving. When a doctor informed her that she needed to be examined, Rosalba refused, insisting she was fine. This raised immediate concerns among the staff. Upon examining the baby, the medical team found several unusual cuts and puncture wounds that did not appear to be from a fall on gravel. The injuries looked like they had been inflicted with a sharp object in a chaotic manner. Fortunately, none of the wounds affected vital organs, and the medical team quickly treated them to prevent infection. Concerns were immediately communicated to the police, who insisted that Rosalba undergo a physical examination. They warned her that if she refused, they would have to use legal authority. With no other option, Rosalba reluctantly agreed. The examination confirmed the doctor's suspicions. There were no signs of childbirth or pregnancy. There was no bleeding, no physical trauma, and no other indicators. Both internally and externally, everything looked normal, indicating that her entire account was fabricated. However, the doctors chose not to confront Rosalba immediately. Instead, they asked her to call her husband, Zolmir, and request that he bring her personal documents since she only had her driver's license with her. They needed to investigate where the baby had come from and the source of the unusual wounds on the newborn. The condition of the baby suggested a delivery in an unsanitary setting, but the full extent of the horrifying crime had yet to be uncovered. Rosalba called Zolmir, informing him that she was at the hospital and that their daughter had been born, but complications had arisen. She requested that he bring some paperwork and told him where to find it. Unfortunately, she made a major oversight. She forgot about a crucial piece of evidence. While gathering the documents, Zolmir inadvertently picked up a medical record that belonged to someone else, specifically Flavia's file. She had taken the folder to review the test results and recommendations and later hidden it in her drawer with her own documents. When hospital staff noticed that the medical file belonged to a woman named Flavia Godinho, who was expecting a daughter in early September, they realized the baby seemed to be hers but was not with her. However, the pressing question remained: where was the real mother? The police immediately began to suspect Zolmir could be involved. He was detained, questioned about how he had obtained someone else's medical file and where his wife had gotten the baby. Clearly confused and shaken, he claimed he had no idea what was happening. When informed that Rosalba had never been pregnant, he was visibly stunned. He then asserted that this was not true, stating he had cared for Rosalba throughout her pregnancy and even claimed to have felt the baby move. He presented photos from their maternity shoot and messages he believed were from the doctor monitoring her pregnancy. However, these messages turned out to be incriminating. They were filled with spelling errors and incorrect medical terminology. Authorities quickly discovered that the texts had come from Rosalba's own phone. After laying out all the facts, Zolmir broke down in tears, covering his face with his hands. He had truly trusted his wife and was eagerly anticipating becoming a father. Meanwhile, Flavia's husband, Valdelli, had reported her missing. He informed the police that she had left with a friend to attend the baby shower, expecting to return by 9 p.m., but she never came back and her phone was off. Worried, Valdelli began calling other guests who were said to be invited to the party, only to find out in shock that the event had been cancelled the day before. As Valdelli continued to attempt to reach Rosalba, the friend who supposedly organized the gathering, his concern deepened when he discovered her phone was also turned off. Realizing he couldn't wait any longer, he went directly to the police. However, law enforcement had not yet received the hospital report regarding Rosalba and the newborn, so they were unaware that the cases might be linked. The officers said they would start searching in the morning, but that wasn't sufficient for Valdelli. He teamed up with Flavia's parents and other relatives to begin their own search. They divided into teams to cover more areas, and Valdelli decided to check the outskirts of town. It was there, while passing by an abandoned factory, that he chose to stop and investigate. Tragically, he found his wife's body, brutally disfigured. Shocked and terrified, he quickly called the police, unable to understand what had happened or who could commit such a horrific act. When the police arrived, they had already been informed by the hospital about Rosalba. This woman also possessed a medical file belonging to a woman named Flavia Godinho. The authorities realized that the name of the victim discovered at an abandoned factory matched the name on the stolen medical file, which clarified the case. Forensic evidence showed that the victim had been hit at least 5 times in the head with a brick, but these injuries were not fatal on their own. The cause of death was identified as severe blood loss due to a violent attempt to remove the baby. A box cutter used in the act was found near the body. With all the evidence pointing to Rosalba's guilt, it became a straightforward case. DNA testing confirmed that the baby Rosalba attempted to claim was indeed Flavia's daughter. Despite the strong evidence against her, Rosalba continued to deny her involvement and maintained her story. Her fingerprints were discovered on the knife beside Flavia's body. Flavia's blood was found on her clothes, shoes, and hair. Investigators confirmed that Rosalba had a miscarriage months earlier and had lied about still being pregnant. She had premeditated the crime, choosing her victim in advance to take the baby, without considering the consequences of her actions. Rosalba was convicted of aggravated homicide, infanticide, concealment of a corpse, obstruction of justice, kidnapping of a minor, and denial of rights to infants. In hopes of receiving a lighter sentence, she later recounted the events in detail, shocking everyone in the courtroom. Her attorney claimed that Rosalba had suffered a psychological breakdown after her miscarriage and became obsessed with motherhood, losing touch with reality. However, a psychological evaluation determined that she was mentally competent and fully accountable for her actions. She was sentenced to 57 years in prison, with the possibility of parole after serving at least half of her sentence. Zolmir, Rosalba's husband, was completely exonerated. It was established that he had no knowledge of his wife's plans and had no part in the crime. Shortly after her arrest, he filed for divorce and moved away from São João Batista. Flavia's family also chose to leave the small town after the legal proceedings were finished. The case had become the most talked about topic in the community, and they wanted to protect young Cecilia, the name they chose for Flavia's daughter. The tragic murder of Flavia Godinho Mafra stands as a chilling reminder of how far desperation and obsession can drive a person to commit unspeakable acts. The small, tight-knit community of São João Batista was forever changed by this brutal crime, which shattered their sense of safety and trust. Flavia, a beloved teacher and soon-to-be mother, was robbed of her life and dreams by someone she considered a friend, leaving her family and community to grapple with unimaginable grief. Rosalba Maria Grimes' calculated deception and heinous actions not only took a life but also exposed the depths of her fixation on fulfilling a fantasy at any cost. While justice was served with her conviction, the scars left on Flavia's loved ones and the town will endure. Cecilia, Flavia's daughter, survives as a symbol of hope amidst tragedy, raised by a family determined to honor her mother's memory. This case underscores the profound consequences of unchecked ambition and the devastating ripple effects of betrayal, serving as a somber lesson in the value of empathy, honesty, and the sanctity of human life. Sandra Birchmore was born on May 13, 1997, in Stoughton, Massachusetts. Her childhood was difficult, forcing her to mature early. Her mother, Denise, faced serious health problems, which led to financial hardship for the family. Her father was absent, providing neither emotional nor financial support, which left her mother as the sole breadwinner. Despite the challenging circumstances, Sandra received support from her mother's long-term partner and her grandmother, Grace, who helped care for Denise as her health declined. In a family where survival often took precedence over stability, Sandra learned resilience and responsibility at a very young age. From an early age, Sandra was inspired by public service, showing great respect for authority figures, especially police officers and military personnel. This admiration stemmed from her family background, as many of her maternal relatives had served in law enforcement or the armed forces. Her interest in police work began at the age of 8 when she joined a program called Respect. This initiative aimed to help children develop civic responsibility and communication skills, while fostering positive relationships with law enforcement. It was here that Sandra's dream of becoming a police officer first emerged. Eager to pursue this goal, she got involved with the Police Explorers program at the age of 12. This program introduced young people to law enforcement, providing training in safety protocols, emergency response, and police procedures. From 2010 to 2016, Sandra committed herself to the program, taking each lesson seriously and striving to improve her skills. Friends and mentors were impressed by her dedication, recognizing that this was more than just an extracurricular activity, it was the foundation for her future. However, life had unexpected turns ahead. In 2016, when Sandra was 19, tragedy struck with the passing of her mother, Denise. This loss left her heartbroken. Although her aunt offered support, the grief was overwhelming. This difficult time coincided with the end of her participation in the Police Explorers program, creating a challenging crossroads for her. The career in law enforcement she had once dreamed of seemed to drift away as she struggled to regain her footing. After graduating high school, Sandra decided to pursue a new path by enrolling in college prep courses with the intention of studying nursing. While she shifted her focus, she never completely let go of her passion for police work and maintained connections with her peers from the Explorers program. However, the struggles she faced during her childhood impacted her in ways she didn't fully understand. The loss of her mother and the absence of a strong father figure left her seeking guidance and validation from authority figures, a vulnerability that would significantly shape her future. In 2020, Sandra moved to Canton, a town in Norfolk County, Massachusetts, with a population of about 25,000, in search of a new beginning. Canton was known for its safety and friendliness, making it an attractive place for her to settle down. She found a job as a teacher's assistant at Sharon Public School, where she worked with students who had special needs. Although this role was not her ultimate career aspiration, she viewed it as a stepping stone toward a better future. Her experience caring for her mother had fostered a strong desire to help others, and she aimed to build a career that would allow her to make a difference. Colleagues regarded Sandra as outgoing and friendly, though her emotional openness sometimes crossed boundaries, making others uncomfortable. Despite her tendency to overshare personal information, her dedication to her students is evident. She genuinely cares and invests a great deal of effort into her work. Although she lacks experience, her warmth and ability to connect with others endear her to many. However, this also renders her vulnerable to those who might take advantage of her trust. Sandra views her time at Sharon Public Schools as a temporary phase leading to something more meaningful. She had goals and dreams for a purposeful future. However, her eagerness to connect with others and her tendency to trust without question would ultimately lead her into a dangerous situation with severe consequences. Sandra met Matthew Farwell for the first time in 2010 when she was 13 years old. At the time, she participated in the Police Explorers program, which sparked her interest in law enforcement. Matthew, a 27-year-old instructor in the program, quickly became a mentor to her. Initially, their interactions were limited to activities within the program, but as time went on, their communication extended beyond official meetings. By the time Sandra turned 15, Matthew started sending her personal messages. He used subtle psychological tactics to make her feel dependent on him. What had begun as guidance turned into manipulation, and over the years, their relationship developed into an unhealthy dynamic. Matthew's control over Sandra grew as he inserted himself into all areas of her life, becoming extremely possessive. He demanded to know her whereabouts at all times and insisted that she keep him updated on her acquaintances. His need for control extended to technology, which he used to track her movements, further restricting her independence. As his jealousy increased, so did his volatility. His once loving demeanor could quickly turn aggressive, filled with veiled threats. Whenever Sandra tried to assert herself, he perceived any opposition as a betrayal. Despite the toxic nature of their relationship, Sandra remained hopeful for improvement. She rationalized his behavior, convinced herself that he cared for her, and held on to the belief that the man who initially seemed protective would not become her greatest source of fear. By early 2021, Sandra was preparing for a significant life change. She was expecting a baby. Despite facing many challenges, she looked forward to the future with hope. Her apartment was filled with baby items she carefully selected, from tiny clothes to essential supplies. Even though money was tight, she was determined to celebrate her baby's arrival and planned a baby shower to share this special moment with her loved ones. Her excitement was evident, and everyone could see how invested she was in becoming a mother. She had even arranged for a newborn photography session to capture those precious early days of her child's life. However, beneath her cheerful exterior, she was struggling inside. Her relationship with Matthew was a significant source of stress. Although he was still part of her life, he often caused more anxiety than support. In the days leading up to the crisis, Matthew's behavior became increasingly unpredictable. He came to Sandra's apartment, pretending to help her prepare for the baby, but soon asked for access to her home, requesting both a key and the door code for emergencies. Once inside, he seemed unusually focused on her bedroom closet, paying more attention to it than was normal. After his visit, Sandra confided in a friend about Matthew's strange behavior but attempted to rationalize it, convincing herself that his actions were driven by concern. This was the last time she expressed any doubts about him. On February 4, 2021, alarm bells rang at Sharon Public School when Sandra didn't show up for work and failed to respond to calls. Although a recent snowstorm had caused disruptions in the city, her absence felt out of character. After several days without news, her co-workers contacted the authorities. Officers were dispatched for a welfare check at her apartment. They knocked and rang the doorbell multiple times, but no one answered. The distinctive smell of decomposition coming from inside raised immediate concern. The officers broke into the apartment and found Sandra in her bedroom. It was clear she had been dead for several days. At first glance, there were no signs of struggle, the furniture was undisturbed, and the overall messiness of the apartment matched her typical living conditions. However, when her family later entered the apartment, they noticed unsettling details. A load of freshly washed but wet laundry sat in the washing machine, indicating she had been going about her daily routine before her death. On the table, unopened packages of baby items had been delivered just days prior. One of the most concerning finds was a broken necklace near where she was discovered, raising questions about what really happened in her last moments. According to Sandra's family, she wore this necklace all the time, even while sleeping or showering. This discovery casts doubt on the idea that she ended her life. If she never willingly removed the necklace, how did it end up broken at the scene? Adding to their worries was the strange situation with Sandra's phone. She routinely used it throughout the day and seldom turned it off. However, records revealed that her phone shut down a full day before her death and never turned back on. This behavior was inconsistent with what her family knew, leading them to suspect outside involvement. Determined to find the truth, Sandra's family insisted on a more thorough investigation. As new information emerged, especially regarding her troubled relationship with Matthew Farwell, authorities had to reconsider their initial conclusions. His behavior in the days leading up to Sandra's death raised alarms, particularly his insistence on accessing her apartment and his odd conduct during his last visit. These inconsistencies prompted investigators to probe deeper into what really happened in Sandra's home. The last known activities of Sandra occurred on the evening of February 1, 2021. Surveillance footage showed her arriving home from work around 5 p.m. Soon after, she briefly stepped outside to pick up a package of baby clothes she had ordered. The cameras later recorded her outside once more, brushing snow off her car. She re-entered her apartment at exactly 5:46 p.m., which was the last time she was seen alive. That night, Matthew appeared on the building's security cameras. Around 9 p.m., he was seen entering the lobby and heading to Sandra's floor. He remained in her apartment for about 30 minutes. His heavy winter clothing and face mask suggested he was prepared for the cold, but his intent to conceal his identity was notable. The next day, Sandra did not show up for work and did not respond to messages, which raised concern. Federal investigators quickly took an interest in her case and began a comprehensive review. Their main focus was the initial crime scene assessment, which they deemed inadequate and which missed vital details. They quickly found evidence disproving the theory that Sandra had harmed herself. She had been excitedly preparing for her baby's arrival, ordering supplies, planning a baby shower, and scheduling maternity photos. These actions demonstrated that she was looking forward to her future, not preparing to end her life. Further suspicions grew when forensic experts examined the injuries on Sandra's body, as the marks were inconsistent with typical self-harm patterns. Investigators also analyzed Matthew's phone records and found deleted messages that revealed a troubling history of manipulation and coercion. They discovered that Sandra had been pregnant with Matthew's child, which significantly altered the direction of the investigation. At the time of her death, she was 3 months pregnant, a fact that intensified their already troubled relationship. Matthew not only denied any responsibility for the child but also reacted with aggression, applying both psychological and physical pressure on Sandra. Her pregnancy became a source of escalating conflict. Initially, Matthew tried to distance himself from her and avoided discussions about the baby. However, as he began to understand the implications of the situation, he re-established contact. His sudden change in behavior, from avoidance to outreach, raised further concerns for investigators. After Sandra's death, they discovered an important detail: Matthew was married with children. Although Sandra was aware of his marital status, she found out in late 2020 that his wife was expecting their third child. This news was devastating for Sandra, prompting her to confide in a friend about her emotional turmoil. She even considered informing Matthew's wife about their affair but ultimately decided against it. When Sandra informed Matthew of her pregnancy, he responded with hostility. He questioned whether he was the father and made it clear he wanted nothing to do with the baby. As tensions rose, Matthew's behavior became increasingly erratic, leaving Sandra feeling anxious and overwhelmed by the pressure and threats she faced. She shared her worries with friends. Investigators found concerning patterns in their communications. Matthew frequently monitored her movements, exhibited extreme jealousy, and sent threatening messages. Matthew's manipulative behavior extended beyond Sandra and possibly affected others as well. What began as a case involving one young woman revealed a broader pattern of misconduct within the Police Explorers program, where Matthew had been a mentor. A review of the program's records uncovered multiple instances of inappropriate relationships between instructors and participants. Sandra had joined the program at age 13, and her involvement with Matthew began when she was only 15, an ethical violation that, compounded by their significant age difference, crossed serious legal lines. However, Sandra's case was not an isolated incident. A larger investigation into the Police Explorers program unveiled decades of unchecked misconduct. Established in the 1970s, the program had operated with little oversight, allowing mentors to misuse their authority without facing consequences. Investigators discovered that other officers, including Matthew's brother William Farwell and their superior Robert Devine, were also involved in misconduct. They uncovered over 200 cases of inappropriate behavior that had gone unreported or improperly investigated over the years. Additionally, they found that in January 2021, an officer had received an anonymous tip about possible misconduct involving Matthew. Instead of reporting it, the officer privately warned Matthew, enabling him to cover up his actions. Shortly after, Matthew began deleting messages and took steps to regain Sandra's trust, which investigators believed was an attempt to prevent her from coming forward. The exact incident inside Sandra's apartment that night remains unclear, but forensic evidence suggests a likely timeline. Tensions may have risen when Sandra mentioned her pregnancy, possibly seeking Matthew's acknowledgement or support, which could have serious implications for him if revealed. A broken necklace found near her body indicated a struggle, and investigators theorized that Matthew may have used force against her. Her phone, which was turned off shortly after Matthew arrived, might have held critical evidence about that night. These findings shifted the case from suspected self-harm to potential homicide. Sandra's death led to Matthew Farwell's arrest in 2024 and revealed systemic failures within local law enforcement. The Police Explorers program was permanently closed, but the consequences of years of unaddressed misconduct continued to impact many lives. This case sparked widespread calls for reform, prompting authorities to reconsider how they monitor mentorship programs involving minors. The investigation into Sandra's death reached a significant point in August 2024 when Matthew was arrested and charged. Prosecutors provided compelling evidence linking him to the incident that occurred that night. This evidence included text messages that showed years of manipulation and control, security footage that captured him at Sandra's apartment shortly before she was last seen alive, and forensic analysis indicating that her injuries were not self-inflicted. The charges against Matthew also included several counts related to his inappropriate relationship with Sandra when she was underage. Records indicated that he had used his position in the Police Explorers program to groom and manipulate her from a young age. These revelations undermined his claims of innocence, which he maintained even after his arrest. However, Holding other suspects accountable proved to be challenging. Investigators had connected Matthew's brother, William Farwell, and their superior, Robert Devine, to misconduct within the program, but they were never formally charged. Many believe that law enforcement is reluctant to confront more serious problems in the system, which has led to a lack of further prosecutions. As of early 2025, Matthew Farwell's trial was still in progress. Prosecutors contended that Sandra had been forcibly restrained and that her death had been staged. Forensic experts testified that key signs, such as specific eye hemorrhages and facial swelling, were absent, supporting the theory that she had been subdued before her body was placed in the closet. If convicted, Matthew could face the harshest penalties, including a potential death sentence. Sandra Birchmore's case became more than just a tragic incident. It highlighted systemic failures in law enforcement oversight. Her family, along with activists and advocates, continued to seek justice, determined to ensure her story remained heard and that her case would lead to meaningful reform. Welcome back, mystery lovers. Today's case is going to keep you on the edge of your seat. The case of the Watts family. Shannon Razusek, 34, and her husband, Christopher, 33, have two daughters, Bella, 4, and Celeste, 3. Both are from North Carolina and met on Facebook. Initially, she did not accept her proposal. When Shannon faced difficulties in her life, Christopher supported her, and their relationship began to grow rapidly from that point. They relocated to Frederick, Colorado, where they got married on November 3, 2012, and decided to start a family despite facing challenges. At that time, Shannon was informed that she might not be able to have children due to her lupus diagnosis, an autoimmune disease. Nevertheless, Christopher reassured her of his unwavering support and encouraged her to accept his marriage proposal. Despite her health issues, Shannon joyfully became a mother and gave birth to two beloved daughters, whom she described as amazing and spirited. Shannon then discovered she was pregnant with a baby boy. This news filled her with excitement, knowing how Christopher had always dreamed of having a son. She was thrilled to fulfill his wish and expand their family, and her daughters were also excited about welcoming a new sibling. They even chose a name for the baby, Nico. Shannon was very active on social media, frequently posting updates about her life on Instagram. She shared videos about herself and her children, showcasing family moments, and engaging with various online communities. To outsiders, it appeared that the family led a perfect life. Christopher worked for a large oil and natural gas company, while Shannon previously worked in human resources at a children's hospital. However, her husband's income was not sufficient to cover their living expenses and the mortgage on their large 5-bedroom home with a 3-car garage. As a result, they filed for bankruptcy in 2015 due to high mortgage payments, health insurance costs, and medical expenses. Soon after, Shannon started a new job at an online supplement company. She loved the job because it offered many benefits. She could spend all day with her children and have quality time with them, while also having the opportunity to travel for work with a high salary, which suited her very well. On June 16, 2018, she shared a heartfelt post on social media about her life, expressing her happiness and satisfaction with her new job. In her post, she mentioned that she loved the lifestyle that allowed her to live fully and cherish every moment with her family. Shannon often expressed her happiness and painted a picture of a thriving, successful, and friendly family on social media. During a live session, she mentioned that she had many upcoming plans and trips. From June 22nd to 26th, she was scheduled to travel to San Diego with Christopher. After that trip, she planned to take their daughters to North Carolina to visit relatives, returning home on August 7th. She was also looking forward to a short business trip for work that would last just a couple of nights. She shared her plans and cheerful posts on social media. After attending a seminar in Arizona, she returned home on August 13, 2018. Her close friend, Nicola Toft Atkinson, picked her up from the airport and dropped her off around 2 a.m. This was the last time anyone saw Shannon alive. A friend later noted that Shannon appeared very tired and exhausted, as if she hadn't been sleeping well, but she seemed determined. It looked like she was preparing for something at home, where her husband Christopher and their 2 daughters were waiting for her. On August 13th, Shannon had an appointment for a checkup regarding her 3rd pregnancy, which was in its 15th week. The doctor's visit was necessary to ensure that everything was progressing normally. However, when she failed to arrive for her 10 a.m. appointment and missed a business meeting, her friend Nicole became concerned. Nicole found it unusual that Shannon wasn't answering her phone or responding to text messages, especially since Shannon typically took her communication seriously because of her job and her responsibilities as a mother. Worried about Shannon, Nicole tried to call her throughout the day. When that didn't work, Nicole decided to check on her at her house. Upon arriving, Nicole noticed her car in the driveway and knocked on the door, but no one responded. Next, Nicole called her husband, Christopher, who was at work, and then contacted the police. The police arrived at 1:40 p.m. and attempted to get a response by knocking on the door, but when that failed, the officer contacted Christopher and suggested he come to help check the house. When Christopher arrived, he entered the house with a police officer. They found Shannon's mobile phone on the sofa, between the pillows, while in the kitchen, her handbag, wallet, and keys were located. A suitcase filled with belongings was near the stairs. All of Shannon's personal items, including her daughter's medicine, were inside the house, indicating that she had not left. Her car was parked as usual, and the child's seats were still in place. Only Shannon and her daughters, Bella and Celeste, were the ones missing. In missing persons investigations, authorities typically start by questioning the partner or spouse of the missing individual, asking if they have noticed anything unusual, have any information, when they last saw them, or if there was any conflict. This case followed the same protocol, and Christopher was asked such questions. He informed the police that Shannon returned home around 2 a.m., and during an emotional conversation, he told her he wanted a divorce. Both were upset and crying. Afterwards, he went to work. He never saw Shannon again. Surveillance footage from a nearby house confirmed that he left at 5:15 a.m., and no one else exited the house after that, prompting the police to call in a detective. Christopher informed the detective that the timeline of the incident began when Shannon returned home at 1:48 a.m. They had a conversation at 4 a.m., and he left for work at 5:15 a.m. Initially, he claimed that he and his wife had an emotional discussion upon her arrival, which was a minor inconsistency in his story. Over the next 2 days, Christopher gave several interviews to the media about the disappearance of his wife and children, trying to present himself as a genuinely worried father. He stated that his children were his life and that their smiles lit up his world, expressing his sorrow over their absence. That image, however, didn't last long. On August 15, 2018, Christopher was arrested on 3 counts of first-degree murder. He had previously failed a lie detector test, and during a later interrogation, he confessed to killing his wife, but denied any involvement in their daughter's death. Investigators also examined the neighbor's video footage, which showed Christopher loading a large, heavy object wrapped in a sheet into his car at 5:30 a.m. on August 13. Notably, there was no video evidence of Shannon leaving the house. This lack of footage led the police to conclude that Christopher was loading the bodies of Shannon and their daughters into the vehicle. Before he fully confessed, he requested to see his father. When his father entered the interrogation room, he shared his account of the incident, shocking everyone present, as no one anticipated what he would say. Christopher shared that he and Shannon had a deeply emotional conversation in which he acknowledged their marriage was failing. Just before leaving for work, he glanced at the baby monitor and saw Shannon attempting to strangle their daughter Celeste by the crib. He immediately rushed to the room and found Bella bruised and, unfortunately, dead. Witnessing Shannon harm their children drove Christopher into a fury, and in a fit of rage, he strangled his wife in a similar manner. Christopher mentioned that after discussing divorce, Shannon threatened that he would never see their daughters again, seemingly indicating she was about to act on her intentions. Following his confession, Christopher revealed to the authorities where he had hidden the bodies, guiding them to the site near his workplace, where oil tanks were located. Shannon was buried in a shallow grave about 40 miles from their home, while their daughter was placed in the oil tanks, submerged in crude oil. He explained that the tragedy arose because he and his wife had drifted apart, focusing on their children but neglecting their relationship. However, a significant detail later emerged that changed the narrative. Christopher had been having an affair with a woman named Nicole Kessinger, which began while Shannon and their daughter were visiting relatives in North Carolina. Nicole was a contractor at Christopher's workplace, where they met and quickly entered into a relationship. He told her that he and Shannon had mutually agreed to divorce and mentioned that they had 2 daughters, but he did not disclose that Shannon was pregnant with their 3rd child. Later, Nicole mentioned that if she had known about the pregnancy, she would never have spent time with Christopher. Although their relationship was new, it progressed quickly, and Nicole was already planning to marry him. The day before Shannon and her daughter went missing, Nicole had been shopping for a wedding dress. When Shannon and the kids' disappearance captured public attention, Nicole went to the police to disclose her affair with Christopher. She revealed that she had visited Christopher's family home twice at the beginning of their relationship, but her visits were brief. Nicole also believed that financial issues were a motive behind Christopher's actions. She recounted that on a night Shannon was reported missing, she called Christopher and found him in bed, getting ready to sleep. He claimed that his wife was missing, likely because she intended to leave him and take the kids with her. Nicole found it odd that he could sleep calmly under such circumstances. Realizing something was definitely amiss, Nicole decided to inform the police and cooperated fully with their investigation. The authorities suspected Nicole's involvement in the murders, but they lacked evidence to support their claims. It later emerged that Christopher and Shannon had experienced disagreements and emotional distance in recent months, leading Shannon to take an extended vacation with their children to reflect and give her husband space to think. However, despite her cheerful social media posts, her messages to Christopher revealed that their relationship was strained. On August 5, 2018, Shannon wrote to Christopher that she was trying to give him space, but while he was working, he was living like a bachelor. She mentioned that she was at home with their 3rd child, managing their 2 other kids every day, working, and trying to earn money. She said it was hard for him to even send a text saying that he loved her and missed her, and she kept checking her phone, hoping to hear from him. In her letter, she expressed her disbelief that it had been 8 years since they started dating and mentioned that they now had 3 kids. She indicated that they needed to talk. The letter conveyed her feelings of missing him and loving him, emphasizing the importance of working on their marriage. However, she also mentioned that if their feelings for each other didn't align, it would be necessary to discuss it. Shannon remarked that she couldn't understand how someone could fall out of love during the 5 weeks she had been away. Christopher stated that he loved Shannon and was with her not just for the children, but he struggled to understand his own feelings. Shannon later confided in a friend that their relationship had faced many challenges and that they had become incompatible, particularly because Christopher refused to attend couples counseling. During the investigation, prosecutors realized that Christopher desired a new romantic relationship and a fresh start, wanting to escape the burdens of family life and the tensions in his marriage. He was even looking for a new apartment with Nicole. After committing the crime, Christopher was not only focused on finding a new apartment but also hurriedly listed his house for sale. On August 21, 2018, Christopher was charged with 3 counts of first-degree murder, 2 counts related to the murder of a child under 12, 1 count of illegal termination of pregnancy, and 3 counts of abuse of a corpse. To avoid the death penalty, he pleaded guilty to all charges in 2018. On November 19, he was sentenced to 5 life terms without the possibility of parole, receiving an additional 48 years for illegal termination of pregnancy and 36 years for abuse of a corpse. 2 months after the verdict was announced, Christopher disclosed the truth about the incident. He explained that he had not loved Shannon for a long time but was afraid to leave her because he thought she would take their daughters. He met Nicole at work and was the first to approach her, claiming that he was already in the process of divorcing his wife and did not wear a wedding ring. During an argument, Christopher strangled Shannon in their bedroom. The autopsy indicated that she had suffered for a while, suggesting that she had tried to fight back. At that moment, their older daughter, Bella, walked in and asked what was happening. Christopher told her that her mother was sick and needed to rest. He then wrapped Shannon's body in a sheet and carried it to the car. When their daughter began to cry, scared and confused, Christopher lost control and strangled both of them, Celeste with her own blanket and Bella with his hands. He heard Bella's last words, "Dad, no," as she fought for her life. Christopher then disposed of the bodies by taking them to the oil site where he worked, burying Shannon and throwing his daughter's bodies into oil tanks. After the verdict, Christopher Watts was sent to state prison but was later transferred for safety reasons to a maximum security facility in Wisconsin, where he will spend the rest of his life. The judge who sentenced Christopher described the murders as some of the most inhumane and cruel acts that he had ever encountered in his career. Shannon's father labeled Christopher a heartless monster and expressed a wish that the souls of his daughters haunt Christopher at night. He emphasized that Christopher deserves to suffer. Hi everyone, thanks for returning. Let's unravel another perplexing mystery. The case of Erica and Benjamin Sifrit. Erica Elaine Grace was born in 1978 in Pennsylvania to Charlotte Gale and Gerald Mitchell Grace. As their only daughter, she enjoyed a comfortable and carefree childhood, thanks to her father's wealth from owning a construction company. Erica was intelligent, excelled in high school, and had a passion for basketball. She graduated in 1996 and attended the University of Mary Washington, where she became a basketball star and graduated with honors. However, teachers noted that she lacked confidence in her abilities and was often influenced by others. In 1998, she met Benjamin Adam Sifrit, who exploited her vulnerabilities. At first, it seemed like they were in love and got along well because they shared many common interests, especially in the field of sports. Benjamin, who was born in Esterville, Iowa, was an excellent swimmer and worked as a lifeguard. After graduating from college, he joined the Navy to train in the Navy SEAL Special Units, where he achieved great success. Benjamin and Erica make a great couple, with health and fitness being top priorities in their lives. Benjamin had a large tattoo on his chest adorned with symbols that only he understood. While this might have amused other women, Erica accepted it as a part of his identity. However, it is important to note that Benjamin was manipulative and had a negative personality, using intimidation and arrogance to get what he wanted. After a few weeks of dating, Benjamin proposed to Erica. To the shock of her family and friends, she said yes. This was surprising because Erica had never been impulsive or irresponsible. Accepting a marriage proposal so quickly was out of character for her. However, this time, passion overtook her decision. In 1998, Erica and Benjamin married privately without inviting anyone, not even their parents. Their honeymoon was brief, and soon after, Benjamin's career began to falter. In 2000, Benjamin faced court-martial for various offenses, including poor performance, absence without leave, wearing unauthorized insignia, and insubordination. According to the naval prosecutor, Benjamin had developed a complete disregard for authority. His military lawyer, the captain, noted that he had initially shown promise and received good evaluations, but that something had changed recently. He had lost interest in his service and career, often neglected his duties. Ultimately, Benjamin was discharged in disgrace due to his misconduct. In early 2001, 23-year-old Benjamin and Erica moved to Pennsylvania, close to Erica's hometown. This was the first time Erica's parents met Benjamin, and they were not pleased with him. They opened a scrapbook store named Memory Trail, where they primarily created photo albums for their clients. They then started selling some products online, including items they had stolen from stores and restaurants. Erica felt pressured to meet her husband's expectations and tried to demonstrate her capability by completing tasks that he assigned. However, to cope with her stress, she started drinking excessively and using banned substances. Meanwhile, Benjamin was searching for excitement in his life and sought out unusual experiences. He even bought snakes to keep as pets, causing concern among friends who noticed his strange behavior changes. On the weekend of May 25, 2002, Erica and Benjamin decided to go on a trip together. They went to a nightclub in Ocean City, Maryland, and rented a penthouse in a nearby apartment complex. At the same time, Martha Margene Jenny Crutchley, an insurance agent, and her banker boyfriend, Joshua Edward Ford, were also heading to the same nightclub. Martha and Joshua had been together for about a year and enjoyed spending weekends without a specific plan, simply wanting to eat, drink, and enjoy the night at the Ocean City Club. Erica and Benjamin unexpectedly met Martha and Joshua. They spent several hours together dancing, laughing, and singing. Just before the club closed, they invited Martha and Joshua to their rented penthouse for more drinks and fun. Martha and Joshua joyfully accepted the invitation, unaware that it would be their last night together. When Martha and Joshua failed to show up for work the following week, their colleagues grew concerned and called the police. On May 31st, early in the morning, an alarm went off at the Ocean City chain restaurant due to a theft. The police rushed to the scene to investigate. As they arrived, they saw a man and a woman leaving the restaurant with heavy bags. Upon detaining them, the officers discovered that the thieves were Benjamin and Erica. In addition to the stolen items, weapons were also found in Erica's bag. During a lengthy interrogation, Erica struggled to remain calm, crying and claiming she was experiencing a panic attack and needed her medication from her purse. When a police officer checked her bags, he found something unexpected: ID cards belonging to Joshua and Martha. They refused to explain how they obtained the documents. Meanwhile, a police patrol visited the penthouse rented by Erica and Benjamin. Upon searching the apartment, they found no signs of Joshua and Martha, except for photographs taken during their time together. As the police investigated the house, they became increasingly convinced that a crime had occurred there. Their search revealed several puzzling clues. They discovered blood spatter in both the master bedroom and the bathroom. Additionally, they learned that Erica and Benjamin had purchased paint and plaster, likely to conceal a bullet hole in the bathroom wall. Several bullet casings found on a table matched a weapon owned by Erica, and one of the casings had blood on it. DNA analysis confirmed that the blood belonged to Joshua. During the interrogation, Benjamin chose to remain silent and requested a lawyer. In contrast, Erica began recounting the night's incident, asserting that her husband was the actual killer. She explained that after a night out at a nightclub, Joshua and Martha came to their apartment to continue the evening. At some point, Erica suspected that they had stolen her bag, leading Benjamin to attack them. According to Erica, Joshua was attacked first in the head, followed by Martha, who fled in fear to the bathroom and tried to hide under a small table. Benjamin then killed her as she was curled up in a ball. Erica claimed that Benjamin was responsible for the murders, while she only assisted him in disposing of the bodies. In her confession, she said the bodies were put in trash bags and dumped in a dumpster on the outskirts of Ocean City. The police searched local landfills and found only one of Martha's legs and Joshua's torso and arms. The rest of the bodies were never located, which meant the official cause of death could not be determined. The bullet was fired from a weapon, discovered with Joshua's remains, and was also found next to Erica. Both Erica and Benjamin were charged with first-degree murder for the deaths of Joshua and Martha. However, they both pleaded not guilty. The trial began on March 31, 2003, but due to the media attention, it was relocated outside of Worcester County, Maryland. Benjamin's trial was held in Rockville, and Erica's trial was held in Frederick. The public reacted negatively toward them, who had lived a seemingly luxurious life but turned out to be brutal murderers. According to court documents, Erica described her husband's obsession with power and control and his significant influence over her. However, Benjamin's lawyer contested this claim, arguing that Erica was frequently under the influence of alcohol, strong antidepressants, and diet pills, which may have affected her judgment and contributed to her actions. Benjamin listened quietly during the trial as Erica grew more distant from him. The defense attorney pointed out to the jury that the murder weapon was Erica's and presented ballistics results showing that the bullets from that weapon killed Joshua. Although the weapon was confiscated from Erica at the time of her arrest, proving that she was the one who pulled the trigger was difficult. The prosecution was represented by the Worcester prosecutor, who called a witness named Melissa Selling. She had spent the evening with Benjamin and Erica after her friend had taken her out on a date. At the trial, Melissa initially cried and seemed upset, but then she collected herself and testified. She explained that when she arrived at the date venue, Benjamin and Erica were already there. They were in a car with a flat tire, appeared drunk, and were acting strangely. Melissa recalled that Erica approached her and hugged her as if they were close friends, even though they had never met before. Benjamin had blood on his mouth, likely from biting his lip during the incident with the tire. The group soon went to the apartment they were renting. There, Melissa and her friend were shown Erica's pet snakes. Erica mentioned that she took medication for anxiety. When Erica suggested that they all relax in a hot tub and Melissa declined, Erica's mood shifted drastically. She began to scream and became angry, claiming she couldn't find her purse. Benjamin, who had been calm and kept his distance, suddenly jumped up and demanded that whoever took Erica's bag return it. He pulled a weapon from his belt, waved it angrily, and pointed to a bullet hole in the wall of the bathroom. He angrily warns them that they will suffer the same fate as a couple who previously attempted to steal Erica's bag, although the bag remains in its original location, untouched. According to Melissa, Benjamin and Erica often blamed and intimidated others. When Melissa and her friend attempted to leave in their car, Benjamin tried to take control of the vehicle. When asked in court if she believed Benjamin's claim that he had killed a couple, Melissa was uncertain. She stated that she had only thought Benjamin and Erica might be involved in the crimes but could not confirm it. The trial concluded, and after 2 days of deliberation, the jury reached a verdict on April 9, 2003. Benjamin Sifrit was convicted of second-degree murder for the death of Martha but was acquitted of any charges related to the murder of Joshua. This decision angered Joshua's brother, Mark, who expressed his disagreement with the verdict and wished for Benjamin to spend his life in prison. Additionally, Benjamin was found guilty of other charges related to his actions. The judge stated that the crime was committed purely for the thrill of murder. Benjamin killed without any good reason. He was sentenced to 30 years in prison for second-degree murder, along with first-degree assault, and an additional 5 years for being an accessory to another murder. Benjamin also pleaded guilty to second-degree burglary of a chain restaurant and to carrying a dangerous weapon during that break-in, which resulted in a 3-year prison sentence. Overall, his total sentence amounts to 38 years in prison. The judge noted that if it weren't for the excellent work of Benjamin's lawyers, he would have received a life sentence. However, he must adhere to the jury's decision. The judge expressed that this was one of the rare instances in his 20 years on the bench where he disagreed with the verdict. It is also indicated that Benjamin might be eligible for parole after serving half of his sentence. The prosecutor requested to be informed about any parole hearing so he could object, as he believes Benjamin should spend his life in prison. Erica's trial started 2 months later, on June 3, 2003. Her defense team argued that the weapon taken from her was registered to her husband, Benjamin, implying that he was the owner. However, this did not exclude the possibility that Erica had used the weapon herself. The district attorney claimed that Erica and Benjamin had lured Martha and Joshua to their apartment, where they took pleasure in killing for fun. Evidence showed that the bullets found in Joshua's remains were fired from the weapon that Benjamin had given to Erica. Additionally, it is likely that Erica killed Martha, as Erica had detailed knowledge of Martha's hiding place and her position before her death. Erica also collected trophies from her victims. A distinctive ring with a dragon that belonged to Joshua was found on her finger, and photographs later showed her wearing this ring around her neck while posing with her husband. Both appeared carefree, showing no remorse for their actions. Erica had also retained 4 bullet casings as mementos. In her defense, she claimed that Joshua and Martha had stolen her expensive handbag, which contained a valuable ring worth $100,000. However, Melissa testified that the handbag was never missing, it was still there. When Melissa and her friend visited Erica, they attempted to accuse her of theft using their usual tactics. The prosecutor argued that even if there was uncertainty about Erica's involvement in the murders of Joshua and Martha, it was clear she played a significant role in her husband's actions, making her equally culpable. Ultimately, the prosecution determined that Erica and Benjamin acted as a team, and the murders were the result of their combined efforts. During the trial, the defense aimed to show that Erica had been manipulated and exploited. They argued that she was merely a passive bystander and that Benjamin was solely responsible for the crimes. One of the defense lawyers accused the prosecution of twisting the truth to exaggerate Erica's culpability. In contrast, the prosecution portrayed Erica as a young woman who was easily influenced. They presented photographs taken 2 days after the murder in which Erica appeared fragile, weak, yet happy and relaxed. They explained that this was typical for someone dependent on antidepressants, alcohol, and banned substances. The defense and prosecution clashed intensely, but after lengthy arguments, Erica was charged with first-degree murder for the death of Joshua. During statements from Joshua's relatives, Erica maintained a stoic expression. It was only when her life was discussed that she broke down in tears. She attempted to apologize, stating that she deserved everything that was said to her, even the harsh words from her relatives, and added that she didn't deserve to be there asking for their forgiveness. Ultimately, Erica received a life sentence for the second-degree murder of Joshua and an additional 20 years for the murder of Martha. Following the sentencing, Benjamin filed for divorce, which was finalized in August. Both Erica and Benjamin submitted multiple appeals, all of which were denied. Benjamin became eligible for parole in 2021, but his request was turned down. His current release date is set for 2030, subject to change based on his behavior. Erica will be eligible for parole in 2024.